It all begins on a devastated battlefield, with one man standing over a mountain of fallen fighters. It is in this tragic setting that Ash, our MC, approaches him. The man stares at him and questions why Ash is there, since his mission was to conquer the East. Heavily injured and exhausted, Ash hesitates and remains silent for a few moments, until he finally replies that he returned with one single goal: to destroy him. Wielding his sword, the MC reveals that he already knew everything. His unit was used merely as disposable bait. Consumed by the feeling of betrayal, he calls this man his father. Showing zero remorse, Rodri confirms the scheme and says that was the only use for a son without wings. To understand the weight of this revelation, we need to know Ash, a member of one of the most powerful families on the continent. The House of Elmheim is famous for its brutal and relentless strength. As the main military bloodline protecting the royalty, it is led precisely by Rodri, the one and only warrior to possess the 7 wings. The relationship between the two started in the past, when the leader rescued baby Ash on the brink of his demise during a blizzard. To repay this life debt, the boy grew up training tirelessly, pushing his body to the absolute limit. He always poured his sweat and tears into battles to prove his worth to the man who saved him. Despite all the effort, the people around him only mocked him, saying that a wingless boy would never make the patriarch proud. After all, the wing emblem defines a person's magical aptitude, and Ash was the only one among his siblings born with 0 power. Even dealing with daily humiliation, he kept a blind faith that his devotion would be recognized one day. With the truth coming to light, the memory of the recent ambush rushes back to his mind. He recalls the exact moment he realized it was a trap, but it was already too late. His entire battalion had been surrounded and wiped out by enemy forces, with 0 chance to defend themselves. Back to the present confrontation, Ash asks if the loss of his comrades was the reward for years of loyalty. Cold and impatient, the old leader replies that a mere tool has 0 right to build expectations, and tells his son to get out of his sight. Hearing these harsh words shatters the last drop of hope still left in the young man's heart. Taken over by fury and regretting his own naivety, he leaps in to attack. Facing the charge, Rodri simply watches his adopted sons advance, without showing any defensive reaction. Ash's strike carries all his frustration and sadness for having loved the man who raised him. Even so, the patriarch remains motionless, as if the attack posed 0 danger. Before the sword can reach him, 2 knights emerge from the shadows and bind Ash with thick chains. Immobilized, the MC takes a simultaneous hit from the 2 guards. The impact hits him head-on, causing excruciating physical pain. Taking advantage of his moment of weakness, one of Ash's siblings steps up to mock him, saying that a wingless would never understand his true place. Forced to his knees in the crimson-stained snow, the boy is surrounded and humiliated by his own family. Coughing up red, he lifts his head and asks the final question: why was he saved in the past if the plan was always to discard him? The patriarch crouches down to look him in the eyes and delivers the harsh truth: he never needed useless trash. Acting without an ounce of pity, the man tightly grabs the injured young man's hair and reveals the big secret. The only thing that truly interested him was the hidden power of the 7 wings dwelling inside that body. Ash goes into immediate shock upon hearing that somehow he possessed this legendary power. To make the revelation worse, Rodri coldly mentions that the MC's mother was a very useful piece, making it clear that the young man's very birth was a mere experiment to satisfy the family's greed. Satisfied, the betrayer lets go of the youth and turns his back, while Ash reaches out a trembling hand, begging for more explanations. Desperate to uncover the truth about his mother, he screams the name of the man he called father. However, the overwhelming cold takes over his body, and his strength quickly fades into the snow. In his final seconds of consciousness, the MC closes his eyes, wondering what the true meaning of his miserable life was. The scene then abruptly shifts to another intense snowstorm in a dark forest. Suddenly, our MC opens his eyes and feels freezing flakes falling on his own face. The biting cold of this harsh winter hits him right away. Upon realizing he can feel the weather around him, he understands he didn't actually pass away, and that all of this is real. Completely lost, he tries to process how he ended up in the middle of that blizzard after being eliminated. But when he tries to move and lift his arms, the confusion only grows as he sees his own size. The startling realization soon hits him: he has been reborn and is now in the body of a newborn baby. Looking around, he realizes he survived the cold because he was shielded by the frozen body of a fallen woman. Before he could understand who she was, aggressive voices begin to echo through the trees. A group of soldiers mounted on horseback scours the area with torches, ordering the relentless search for a fugitive. The knights shout that they need to recover the child at all costs to avoid disappointing Rodri. Shock takes over the infant's little face as soon as he hears the name of his attacker again. Traumatic memories flood his mind, bringing up the face of the man who betrayed him in cold blood. It becomes clear that the target of that night hunt is exactly him. Connecting the dots, Ash deduces the madness of the situation. He didn't just reincarnate, but went back in time to the exact day he was adopted. And the heavy footsteps of the guards are getting dangerously close to his hiding spot. With zero time for despair, the child decides he will have to leave the unanswered questions for later. Knowing perfectly well what awaits him if captured, the baby moves away from the woman's body and decides to act. Even with his tiny body sinking into the soft snow, he starts crawling and dragging himself with all the strength he has. His only goal is to run as far away as possible from the clutches of that cursed family. Driven by pure survival instinct, he doesn't notice that his small hands begin to emanate a magical light. Soon exhaustion takes over, and the freezing air makes his breathing increasingly heavy and painful. But mysteriously, the magical energy increases to the point of making his own limbs burn with heat. Ignoring the absurd physical pain, he keeps crawling, determined to find a way out. In his mind, the MC makes an unshakable promise that he will survive this hellish night, no matter the cost. The pain of betrayal and the abandonment from his past life serve as fuel for his willpower. Filled with a grudge, the boy uses this unknown energy to push forward, swearing vengeance against the patriarch who destroyed him. However, the limit of his fragile body finally arrives, and he passes out from exhaustion in the middle of the white wasteland. Many hours pass until someone finally spots the small unconscious body on the frozen ground. A little girl points in surprise at the baby and calls the attention of an elegant man next to her. The man widens his eyes upon seeing the scene, quickly revealed as the leader of the Vice-County of Highfried. Very carefully, the noble picks him up in his arms, intrigued about how a baby ended up there all alone. Welcomed on the Viscount's warm shoulder, the boy goes back to sleep peacefully, safe after the rescue. Meanwhile, the noble is still trying to process the shock of the discovery. He observes the long continuous trail in the snow and wonders how such a fragile being managed to cross such an absurd distance. Increasingly intrigued, the man hugs the mysterious child, reflecting on his true origin. During his sleep, the MC finds himself awake inside a dark and empty space in his own mind. Floating in this silent immensity, he reaches out to try and grab a glowing feather that slowly falls toward him. However, in the real world, someone pinches his nose hard, making him wake up startled and breathless. As soon as he manages to focus his vision, he comes face to face with three excited little girls celebrating that the baby opened his eyes. Surrounded by unknown faces, Ash panics, having zero idea where he is or who those people are. The situation gets worse when one of them starts squishing his cheeks mercilessly, while the other tries to stop the rough play. Feeling extremely uncomfortable, the boy pushes hard and manages to break free from the girl's grip. Acting on reflex, he starts crawling as fast as he can across the smooth floor of the long hallway. Looking back in desperation, the baby MC just wants to get away from that mess. The little girls run after him, asking him to stop, which only makes him more tense with the unusual chase. It's in the middle of this frantic escape that the newborn's little body once again emanates that strong, magical light from the forest. His eyes begin to glow intensely, activating a mysterious energy instinctively. Suddenly, he is launched into the air by an uncontrolled pillar of light, shocked to realize that it is pure magical power coming from himself. Spinning in the air like a doll, the baby completely loses control of the situation. Unable to stabilize the magic, the effect dissipates and he begins to free fall toward the stone floor. He squeezes his eyes shut, bracing himself for the worst possible impact. Luckily, firm hands catch him in the air just in time. It's the Viscount, who jokes good-naturedly about how weird this baby is for falling from the sky. Still sweating cold from the scare, the boy looks at his savior and recognizes that face right away. It is Viscount Hefried, none other than the older brother of Rodri, the leader of the main family. Ash puts the pieces together and deduces that, ironically, he ended up on the estate of the branch family of the very clan that took him out. and the man who rescued him from his demise is precisely the leader of this branch house. He remembers that, in the past, Hefrid was one of the two pillars of protection for the royalty, but ended up perishing tragically in a civil war. A conflict that resulted in the fall and disgrace of the entire secondary house of Elmheim. Analyzing this whole historical context, the MC gets the ultimate confirmation that he went back in time. Even so, he can't help but notice the bitter irony. He ran away to avoid getting caught by the main family, only to fall into the lap of his future attacker's brother. Right after the scare, the Viscount's wife takes the child in her arms, still amazed by the recent magical explosion. Far from being afraid, the noblewoman shows a welcoming smile full of maternal affection. She gives a soft kiss on the baby's forehead and rocks him tenderly, assuring him that he is now in a safe place. Used to an entire life of pain and rejection, the boy is genuinely surprised by that free display of affection. Watching his wife's interaction with the baby, Hefrid maintains a serene and thoughtful look. The noble then reaches out to the child and states with conviction that he harbors an unimaginable power. To prove his theory, he pulls down the back of the baby's little outfit, revealing a peculiar mark on his back. Seeing the child's reflection in the better mirror, the woman holds her breath as she recognizes the legendary Seven Wings emblem. Ash stares at his own body in absolute shock, not understanding how he was born with that mark, since in his other life he never had any magic. It's at this exact moment that the memory of his final moments comes rushing back to clear his mind. Roderick's voice echoes again, stating that he always knew about the power of the Seven Wings hidden inside him. The memory of the villain grabbing his hair and mocking his end brings all the fury to the surface. The pieces finally fit together. The patriarch didn't just abandon him, but in the past, he drained his life force and erased his true strength. Outraged by the discovery, the MC concludes that he was called useless his whole life by the very man who stole his wings. Noticing the sudden change and the baby's angry expression, the Viscount's wife asks her husband what they will do next. With a serious expression, Hefrid reflects in silence on the dangerous fate of such a powerful child. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the MC fears they will hand him over to the main house and concludes that things are looking bad for him. In his mind, he swears he won't let this power fall into the enemy's hands again, as he needs it to carry out his revenge. But breaking all the tension in the room, the Viscount surprises everyone by firmly declaring that he will adopt the boy. Ash widens his big infantile eyes, completely stunned by the noble's sudden decision. Calmly, Hefrid brings his large hand close to the bewildered child's face. Gently petting the boy's head, he compares the kid to an injured little bird that hasn't learned to fly yet. The leader promises to take on the responsibility of raising and protecting him until the day the young man feels ready to fly with his own wings. Hearing such sincere and protective words deeply touches the MC's hardened heart. The emotional family moment is suddenly interrupted by a clumsy noise coming from the door. The three little girls tumble to the floor, revealing that they were eavesdropping on the conversation from outside the room. They get up awkwardly, rubbing their heads, and confess that they were just worried about the little baby's well-being. But curiosity speaks louder, and they quickly run over to their mother, eager to interact with their new little brother. With the newborn safe in her lap, the woman wonders aloud what name they should give the youngest in the house. She looks at the boy with a gentle, loving smile, searching for the perfect inspiration. Lifting him slightly against the light coming through the window, the noblewoman baptizes him Aster, the new shining star of the family. Time flies, and 10 entire years pass since the day of that life-saving rescue. An elegant carriage arrives at a grand noble estate, where the Viscount, now showing signs of age, is welcomed by the servants. Right after stopping, a well-dressed young man with a confident posture starts stepping down the vehicle's stairs. This is our grown-up MC, now living under the identity of his new name, Aster. Showing the manners of a true lord, he reaches out a hand to help his sister Alphen out of the carriage. With an affectionate smile, the girl thanks her youngest brother for the kindness. The two start walking side by side, crossing the immense courtyard of the event packed with important people. They traveled there to participate in the Sword Dance Assembly, one of the most prestigious tournaments in the region. It is a high-level social gathering where martial houses show off their warriors' power in intense magical combat. The event serves as a grand political stage where young talents must prove their worth to elevate their family's status. As soon as the Viscount and his children cross the doors of the main hall, the guests start gossiping without the slightest shame. Nobles from the other families openly mock the branch house, pointing at Aster and calling him an adopted nobody. They whisper nasty things everywhere, questioning how long Hefried will continue to shame the clan's prestigious surname. Hearing the insults echoing off the walls, the boy scans the crowd with his eyes and concludes that this place is a true snake pit. Sensing the hostile vibe and the weight of the stares, Alphen steps closer and quietly asks her brother to simply ignore the provocations. Aster complies, but clenches his fists tightly, remembering very well that in this social circle, any sign of weakness means the end. Maintaining self-control, the MC keeps walking with firm steps beside his sister, crossing the storm of gossip. Observing the cruel environment, Hefried solemnly comments that this is the harsh reality of the branch family in the eyes of high society. The noble looks back and confesses he made a point of bringing the young man so he could see all this hostility with his own eyes. Straight to the point, he asks his adopted son if the cold and humiliating reception left him disappointed. Without losing his composure, Aster shakes his head no, and guarantees that this level of coldness matches his personality perfectly. The mature and absurdly confident answer draws a sincere laugh of relief from the patriarch. As they advance through the hallways, the young man remembers his past life, when he had the worst debut imaginable, being labeled the family's trash. However, he reflects that the balance of power has completely changed, because now he possesses and controls the magic of the 7 wings. A sharp and dangerous look appears on the boy's face, who is absolutely determined to rewrite his own destiny. With this certainty in mind, the 3 continue their march together toward the tournament's main arena. Right above them, on the upper floor, 2 young nobles from the main house watch the branch family's arrival with evident disgust. Feeling the heavy energy coming from above, the boy pretends not to notice and keeps his posture focused on the event. The Viscount then takes the lead of the group and directs his children's attention to the bleachers. Inside, the MC smiles, knowing the perfect moment has arrived to make a dazzling debut in high society. The central arena is already boiling, faithfully portraying the brutal culture of the era when knights ruled the world. Down below, a competitor charges fiercely, landing a fast and heavy blow with his longsword. The opponent defends the attack with precision, showing that a true warrior needed to combine brute power and technical elegance. The duel continues frantically in the stone center, making it clear that physical strength defined the hierarchy of the blades. On the other hand, elegance in movements and posture were what guaranteed the highly desired acclaim among the noble spectators. With every violent clash of metal, the surrounding crowd cheers and screams in euphoria. The 2 opponents take strategic distance, taking a deep breath and preparing for the next clash that could be fatal. In the blink of an eye, the sword of one of them shatters under the weight of an overwhelming magic, ending the dispute abruptly. The winner raises the remains of the enemy blade in celebration, highlighting the basic rule of that world. The ultimate symbol of power is the crest. A glowing mark shines on the victorious knight's hand, confirming that his magical mastery is infinitely superior to the loser's. Watching the fierce fights from the safety of the balcony, Aster turns to Alphen and comments on how that environment remains terrifyingly tense. The girl agrees with a nervous little laugh, admitting she totally understands why their other sisters bailed on the commitment. Following the flow of warriors in the courtyard, the MC is once again haunted by dark memories from the past. He vividly remembers the times he was thrown in the dirt of that very place, getting beaten and humiliated by nobles his age. The internal nightmare is only interrupted when his sister's confused voice calls his name, bringing him back to reality. Noticing her brother's distant look, Alphen lovingly asks if he's too scared of his first sword dance festival. Honest as always, Aster replies that it's not fear, revealing that all this battle-hardened experience just brings him a nostalgic taste. The girl stares at him in silence for a moment, slightly surprised and intrigued by the mature answer coming from the youngest. The conversation is cut short when Hefried approaches, letting them know he'll need to leave for a political meeting, and asks the boy to take care of his sister. Feeling underestimated, Alphen crosses her arms and protests indignantly, stating she is much more capable of taking care of herself than the youngest. The father ignores the tantrum with a smile and squeezes his son's shoulder, suggesting he use his free time to network with the other youths at the event. But before leaving, the noble changes his demeanor to a severe expression and whispers in the boy's ear, "Hide the power of the 7 wings at all costs." The young man nods in silence, processing the advice while watching the patriarch disappear down the long hallway. Without his father's protective figure around, he once again feels the weight of dozens of hate-filled stares coming from the dark corners of the hall. Scratching the back of his neck with an ironic smile, the boy wonders how his father expects him to make friends surrounded by such aggressive people. Suddenly, a familiar commotion on the lower floor catches his sharp eyes. Ignoring the tension in the air, he turns his back on the arena and starts walking down the stairs, leaving Alphen confused about where he's going. He walks with long, determined strides toward the main lobby, focused on putting the idea of interacting into practice. Arriving at the luxurious resting area, he stops on purpose right in front of a group of young nobles acting like they own the place. The leader of the pack, a red-haired guy, sprawled comfortably on a sofa, glares at him with disdain and bluntly asks who he is. Using a purposely calm and polite tone, Aster introduces himself to Darius, justifying that he saw him from afar, decided to pay his respects. Maintaining the formality of a good lord, he states his full name and humbly declares himself as his younger brother. Darius doesn't move an inch, keeping his cold stare and arrogant, relaxed posture. Breaking the silence, a friend sitting nearby whispers in the redhead's ear, warning that this is the adopted boy from the Branch family. Realizing who he was talking to, the heir gives a mocking smile and questions the audacity of the trash, using the prestigious main surname. Staring at the faces in front of him, the MC confirms to himself Darius and Grion were the legitimate heirs who tortured and took him out in his past life. In the old days, their simple presence would make him tremble with terror. But today, the young man's perspective is absurdly different. He analyzes that little circle of tyrants and coldly concludes that they are nothing more than spoiled brats playing at being dangerous adults. Aster's thoughts are cut off when his sister's distressed voice echoes through the hall, making his eyes narrow. Alphen comes running and grabs her youngest brother's arm in a hurry, trying to pull him away from there after that brief greeting. The girl shoots a look of pure anger at the nobles, but Darius notices and mocks them, loudly asking if the failure's little girl also came to show her face. The heir continues the verbal assault, cruelly questioning if she didn't plan on spending the entire day hiding behind her daddy's cape. Overflowing with arrogance, he snaps his fingers and demands the young woman stay there to entertain the group, claiming it's a direct order from the main family. Furious with such an abuse of power, Alphen promptly refuses, holding her head high to make it clear that the branch house is nobody's slave. Fearing the fight would get out of hand, the MC tries to intervene with a calm voice, telling the girl they should leave and avoid the worst. Refusing to accept the disobedience, Darius jumps up and violently grabs Alphen's arm to stop her from taking another step. The boy notices the physical aggression instantly, and the remaining trace of patience on his face completely vanishes. Showing a sadistic and creepy smile, the main noble prepares to fire the worst possible insult against the girl's honor. He yells at the top of his lungs for the whole hall to hear that her father was a coward who failed to protect the king during the war. The girl freezes, feeling the weight of the pain as the jerk reminds her that Rodric cut off his own brother's arm as punishment for that unforgivable failure. Darius finishes the psychological assault laughing, thanking the heavens for not carrying the gross lineage of losers in his veins. Reaching the limit of her outrage, Alphen tries to lunge at him, screaming and demanding the redhead take back what he just said about Hyfried. But before she could even raise her hand, the guy throws all the red wine from his glass straight into the young woman's face. Completely drenched and humiliated, the girl paralyzes as she hears that the Viscount is only good for producing useless daughters, incapable of upholding the family legacy. Spinning the empty glass with disdain, the heir bets out loud that her father must cry of shame every day because of it. And he ends the freak show, telling the girl to show up wearing rags next time so she doesn't have to worry about getting her clothes dirty in the hall. Standing a few steps behind his sister, the MC watches the scene with a purely dark look, recalling that he was worried on the way to the event. He watches the cronies laughing uncontrollably at the humiliation and reflects that his real fear was not being able to feel more anger when seeing those monsters again. Without saying a word, Aster's hand moves with extreme speed and grabs a sealed wine bottle by the neck from the table next to him. Positioning himself as a shield in front of the young woman, he grips the glass firmly and feels immense relief. The hatred he feels for those idiots is still alive, catching everyone's attention in the hall. The MC raises the heavy bottle and roars Darius's name with lethal intent. Giving zero time for response or defense, Aster hurls the object like a brutal projectile toward the air. As the glass container cuts through the air at an absurd speed, the young man mutters that the jerk hasn't changed at all and is still the same trash as always. The impact is violent, shattering the entire bottle right on the noble's head, leaving him completely dazed while the wine and crimson drip down his face. The sudden aggression freezes the crony's smiles, while Alfin brings her hands to her mouth and screams her brother's name in absolute shock. Wiping his drenched face, Darius blinks in confusion, struggling to understand what kind of attack just hit him. Breaking the tense silence, Aster asks with a fake mocking tone, "Is that was grape juice?" assuring that the stain perfectly matched a spoiled noble's face. While chaos ensues, the boy's mind travels to an intense training session he had with Hyfried 3 years ago, the day he unleashed a colossal magical aura. On that occasion, the energy pressure made his sisters fall to the floor crying in pain, prompting his father to ask, terrified, if the boy was trying to take out his own family. The crushing and dense weight of that dark power deeply traumatized all the members of the peaceful branch house. Faced with that monstrous display, the Viscount was certain he was standing before the true, pure, and dangerous power of the Seven Wings. Trembling, the Patriarch wondered out loud if such an unstable and corrupt force could really be controlled by anyone without causing a tragedy. But it was exactly on that day that the MC promised himself he would tame every drop of that lethal energy, no matter the cost. The commotion in the lobby soon escalates into something bigger and, back in the present time, a flustered guard barges into the family leader's meeting room. Annoyed by the breach of protocol, Hefri demands to know the reason for that desperate interruption in the middle of the main family's talks. The breathless guard drops the bomb. The sons of the main house and the branch house are about to eliminate each other in a duel in the event's lower courtyard. The news shocks everyone in the room, even drawing a slight raised eyebrow from the ruthless Rodri, the silver-haired leader of Elmheim. Desperate imagining the boy facing a monster from the main house, Hefried abandons the meeting and sprints down the hallway to stop the massacre. Arriving out of breath at the hall's upper balcony, he leans over the railing, screams his daughter's name, and demands to know what madness just happened down there. Before she can answer, another noble in the meeting room points to the outdoor arena with a sadistic smile of excitement, calling the main leader's attention to the spectacle. Down in the center of the dirt courtyard, Aster and Darius are already face-to-face with drawn swords in a clash that the leadership considers a rare entertainment to watch. Observing the tension from above, the white-haired patriarch crosses his arms and coldly comments that the outcome of this confrontation will dictate a lot in the clan's future. Drawn by the sound of blades, the other party guests abandon their conversations and rush to the windows, eager to watch the beef from the front row. A muscular noble in the crowd lets out a laugh, predicting that this prestigious sword dance tournament is going to get real ugly. Focused solely on the hate he feels, Darius channels an absurd amount of power into his blade and warns through gritted teeth that picking a fight with the main house is pure idiocy. A blinding light wraps around the redhead's hand, projecting into the air the imposing four wings crest, a fact that draws murmurs of admiration from the crowd. Bathed in arrogance, he points the flaming weapon at Aster and tells the outcast to show his own emblem so they can compare the glaring difference in level. The heir mocks out loud, asking if the adopted boy is ashamed to show his mark, and, to his surprise, the MC calmly agrees. With chilling coldness, Aster argues that he really wouldn't have the courage to display such an insignificant and mediocre pattern as his, with so much pride. The razor-sharp insult hits the noble's ego dead on, making the redhead's blood boil with hatred almost instantly. Completely blind with rage, Darius declares that when he wins, he will make the kid his lapdog, but Aster simply demands a formal apology for his sister. Without the stomach to hear or accept the conditions, the redhead charges like a wild bull, screaming that he's going to enslave the boy for the rest of his life. The swords collide in the center of the arena violently, generating a shockwave and an explosion of sparks right on the first contact of the fight. The redhead's impressive brute force pushes the MC back, forcing him to slide his feet across the stone floor to create and maintain distance. Despite the immense initial physical pressure, Aster keeps a firm and serene posture, his eyes focusing only on the enemy blade's movement trajectory. Feeling he has the magical advantage, Darius laughs and brags that he is finally showing the true abyss of power that separates the chosen from the useless. Fueled by this confidence, he unloads a fast and extremely fierce sequence of top-down slashes against his opponent. Following the struggle from high up on the balcony, Alphen can't take the tension and screams her brother's name, overcome by terror and very worried about the situation. The muscular noble, on the other hand, analyzes the movements with a clinical eye and notes that the heir's sword technique is still quite immature. However, he admits that the overwhelming amount of mana generated by the crest easily makes up for any lack of skill in close combat. The rule of power difference in that world is cruel and clear. If the power granted by one single wing equals only the harmless heat of a candle flame, the mana compressed and sealed inside a 4-wings crest carries the destructive potential capable of generating a true lethal explosion. The redhead keeps pressing the attacks relentlessly and mocks the courage the adopted boy was showing just a little while ago in the hall. Without slowing down, he asks with sarcasm if the boy wasn't going to force him to beg the much-demanded forgiveness for the humble-brained sister. Decided to end the playtime, the heir takes a colossal leap, raises his flame-consumed sword, and tells the opponent to show his true power. Seeing that deadly and lightning-fast strike coming from above, one of the fancy guests in the crowd already shakes his head, decreeing the fight is over. The redhead's superheated blade comes down at an absurd speed, with the sole objective of slicing the enemy in half once and for all. Showing zero desperation, Aster performs a fluid move. He defends the colossal impact flawlessly and redirects all the force of the attack straight into the ground. The terrifying ease of that defense leaves Darius terrified, failing to understand how his perfect and fatal strike ended up failing miserably. Staring at the jerk's terrified face mere inches away, the MC warns with an icy voice that he talks way too much during a fight. Taking advantage of the imbalance and the enemy's completely wide-open guard, the boy steps in and delivers a clean, deep cut straight into the redhead's abdomen. With the opponent's crimson splashing, Aster plants his feet firmly in the arena, while a terrifying and impressive energy begins to emanate from his body. He finally reveals the secret of his strength. He spent the entire past decade just learning to control his own mana, waiting for the moment of his revenge. Unleashing a dense golden aura that blinds the surrounding spectators, the young man strikes back with an absurd and predatory intensity. The new clash between the weapons reverses the roles of the fight and forces the red-haired heir to step back, groaning in pain from the immense bone-crushing pressure forced onto his arm. Darius's fine shoes drag uncontrollably across the stone floor in a useless and desperate attempt to maintain his own balance. In the safety of the balcony, the heir's blonde friend widens his eyes in pure shock seeing his invincible partner getting beaten like a rookie in the brawl. Darius no longer has the strength to hold his own weapon straight, being violently pushed back by the MC's overwhelmingly superior force. Trembling from the Herculean effort, with a pale and bleeding face, the noble mutters in disbelief that he shouldn't be losing having a coveted 4-wings emblem. On the other side of the locked blades, Aster doesn't say a word, maintaining only an intimidating look completely drowned and covered by his supreme magic. The vibe of amusement in the VIP box vanishes and the crowd enters absolute despair upon realizing that Darius is being unilaterally and mercilessly massacred. The shock is so great that they begin to fearfully question if the main family has anyone capable of dealing with this kind of monstrous power. Focused solely on annihilating his target, the boy intensifies the dark energy even more, making it overflow and glow in his own eyes. Watching the imminent carnage from the balcony, Hefri grips the railing and concludes with terror that things are going to go very wrong politically if they continue. Reaching the final limit of his endurance, the redhead lets out a high-pitched scream of agony, trying in vain to hold back the crushing advance of Aster's attack. At that, the MC recalls the exact moment from his past life where this very heir laughed hysterically at his cruel end. The traumatic memory of the past acts like gasoline, making Aster's hatred explode in an uncontrollable blast of magic that sweeps the entire arena. With gritted teeth and pure fury stamped on his face, the young man prepares the decisive blow to split the enemy in two and finish his revenge right there. Sensing the clear lethal intent in that instant, the Viscount screams desperately at the top of his lungs, ordering his son to stop the attack immediately. Hearing the choked-up voice of the one who saved him from the snow snaps the boy out of his trance, managing to divert the sword's path at the last second, exploding the lethal magic in mid-air. The resulting shockwave opens a crater in the wind, and the realization that colossal destruction was avoided by so little leaves the muscular noble in absolute silence. The indirect impact of the final strike crushed the redhead's sword and made him fall to his knees in the stone courtyard, powerless, broken, and totally defeated. Cold and superior, Aster looks down at the panting and humiliated opponent, throwing back his earlier insult by telling him to come dressed in rags next time. DMC coldly suggests the jerk wear something he doesn't mind getting covered in dirt and battle scars, finishing the humiliation by calling him cousin with the tone of deep disgust. With the victory secured, Aster sheathes his weapon with frightening elegance, turns his back, and guarantees to himself that he is no longer the useless wingless boy from before. Up on the balcony, Alphen watches the end of the combat, visibly relieved. Down below, the MC concludes that just testing this new strength was enough to calm his mind for now. However, this peace is short-lived. In the shadows of the hall, a threatening gaze shines intensely, carrying a very heavy aura. A terrifying reddish presence takes over the environment and soon catches Aster's attention. He turns his head, startled to feel the absolute weight of that oppressive energy. The source of it all is Rodri. The patriarch overflows with fury, while a thick, magical mist wraps around his body at the top of the stairs. Facing the threat head-on, the boy mutters his uncle's name with a lot of tension. Meanwhile, the nobles around are still commenting, shocked that the Viscount's adopted son really defeated the third heir of the main family. But upon hearing the heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, the guests predict the leader will never accept this humiliation quietly. Sensing the danger, the MC turns completely, bracing himself to deal with the approaching problem. The leader of the 8th generation appears before everyone with an imposing and frightening posture. He walks slowly until stopping right in front of Aster, in the middle of the ruined courtyard. The Duke doesn't hide his outrage at seeing the pathetic sight of his son lying on the ground. Keeping his guard firm, the boy stares back at the man without retreating one single millimeter. In response, Rodri takes one more step forward, asserting his crushing presence before the young warrior. Desperate on the ground, the defeated redhead drags himself and grabs his own father's leg, looking for salvation. Darius accuses Aster of being a bold outcast for having the nerve to challenge the main family's authority. He begs the Duke to use his supreme power and teach the adversary a painful lesson. However, the only response the young man gets is a brutal stomp from Rodri, crushing his already injured hand. The mind-numbing pain makes the air scream in agony as crimson splatters onto the paving stones. This grotesque scene leaves the entire crowd paralyzed with dread. The redhead trembles uncontrollably, totally terrified by his own father's ruthless attitude. Coldly, Rodri asks why the loser of the duel keeps acting so shamefully in front of everyone. Noticing his brother's lethal intent, Viscount Hyfried screams desperately for him to stop immediately. But the Duke is already bringing his blade down with full force, stating that someone incapable of avenging themselves doesn't even deserve to hold a sword. The deadly gleam of the steel cuts the air in a fast motion and with zero mercy. From above, the Viscount watches the scene shocked, foreseeing an imminent tragedy. To everyone's surprise, Aster intercepts the brutal strike and prevents his cousin from being mutilated. Without dropping his guard, the MC justifies the interruption by pointing out that Darius still hasn't apologized to Alphen. Keeping the block firm, the boy mockingly asks his uncle to save the punishment for after the debt is paid. Staring at the boy up close, Rodri comments with disdain that he had already heard about the orphan taken in by Hyfried. Without lowering his head, Aster proudly declares that he is the Viscount's legitimate son and has learned the weight of the family name very well. This firm answer leaves the Duke in a brief moment of deadly silence. Right after, his red aura explodes violently, accusing the youth of dishonoring the main house for nothing. The immense magical pressure released by the Patriarch is closely watched by the elite guests. A blonde noble comments to the others that the situation is far past being just a little childish brawl. Another guest agrees, reinforcing that the consequences of that act will be extremely severe for the boy. The Viscount himself gulps as he remembers that he lost his own arm in the past to pay for a failure. Pressing the blade with even more force, Rodri demands to know which part of his body the brat is going to offer as compensation. With heavy sarcasm in his voice, the MC demands proper respect from his uncle. He simply clarifies that it was a legitimate duel to defend his house's honor against cowardly insults. The silver-haired villain listens to the boy's audacity without changing his cold expression. Unleashing his own bright energy, Aster uses Roderick's words against him and warns he won't lose not even one finger there. Watching everything from afar, Alphen is completely bewildered by her brother's absurd courage. Meanwhile, a blue-haired noble laughs, finding it impossible that this prodigy is only 10 years old. All this audacity leaves the silver-haired duke in a thoughtful silence for a few moments. Surprisingly, he pulls his sword back and pretends to accept the boy's conditions. But, right after telling the kid to prepare his defense, the leader suddenly lunges in a dirty attack. Aster barely has time to react upon noticing the enemy's absurd speed. In the blink of an eye, the young man has to dodge a devastating and cowardly strike. The impact of Roderick's blade against the ground creates a wave of destruction that tears up the entire courtyard. Seeing death pass so close to her brother, Alphen covers her mouth in shock. Desperate over the fatal attack, Hefrid roars his son's name at the top of his lungs. Without thinking twice, the Viscount jumps from the balcony straight into the combat arena. He lands right in front of the boy and uses his own weapon to intercept the Patriarch's next brutal blow. With only one arm, the father tries his hardest to hold back the leader's crushing force. Holding the pressure, Hefrid anxiously asks if Aster suffered any serious injuries. A massive cloud of dust and debris rises into the air around them after the massive impact. The Viscount gulps and looks back, terrified of what he just witnessed. Despite the huge scare, Aster managed to stab his sword into the ground and break his own body while taking 0 damage. With only one small cut on his face, the MC displays a deadly look, focused entirely on his revenge against the Duke. Roderick observes this stubborn resistance from the Branch family with total coldness. Without saying anything else, the ruthless leader sheaths his weapon and turns his back to walk away from there. Taking the hint, the hall guards rush to carry Darius's battered body away. Calmer, the Viscount grips his son's shoulders tightly and breathes a sigh of relief that they are alive. Deactivating his killer aura, Aster completely changes his expression and says he kept his promise to control himself. The father agrees emotionally, praising the magnificent posture the boy showed in combat. Meanwhile, the Patriarch climbs the palace stairs escorted by his allies. One of the nobles accompanying him comments that sudden attack was a pretty childish move. The red-haired ally disagrees and argues that if they let the boy say whatever he wanted, the main family would lose everyone's respect. The crowd in the hall acknowledges that surviving with his head held high against Roderick turned Aster into a rising star. The blonde noble wipes the sweat off his face, confessing he was afraid the kid would split the power of the Elmheim house in two right then and there. With a heavy expression, the Duke predicts that an era of chaos and turmoil is about to arrive. He concludes that a storm capable of breaking the entire world to pieces was just born in that courtyard. While the Branch family hugs down below, the sky clears up, indicating the worst has passed. Sometime later, the routine starts again in the training yard, where Aster lands a clean wooden sword strike that knocks down a knight. Panting after the fall, the man praises the boy's splendid move. He gets up right away and calls the MC young master with a lot of respect. Watching from afar, 2 guards are amazed by the boy's incredible skill, remembering he is still only 10 years old. One of them comments that the motivation to train so hard came after the assembly, where he defeated Roderick's 3rd son. The other agrees that it's very satisfying to see this, since the main family has always treated them with so much disdain. Walking with his training weapon, the MC reflects that he showed enough power and presence at that big event. That should be enough to silence the rumors that mock the Viscount's family and call them a disgrace. But the big obstacle remains the main house, making the boy wish he had tested his real strength to the limit. He wishes he had gone even further during that fight in the hall to find out how much he could handle using his own magic. However, Aster is fully aware that his current level isn't enough to defeat Roderick in a direct confrontation. After all, the magical wing emblem only serves as a meter for the amount of hidden energy someone possesses. Having this innate power is useless without control, and he still can't extract the full destructive potential of his 7 wings. Swinging a heavy blow through the air, the MC wishes he could test this supreme strength without the constant fear of losing his mind. An intense golden glow lights up the youth's eyes as he focuses on this distant goal. The wooden sword violently slams against the stone floor, ending his sequence of moves. With several defeated knights around, The boy impatiently asks if there's no one else left to face him. At that exact moment, he hears footsteps approaching from behind. Alphen appears sighing, notices her brother overdid it again, and lets him know their father is calling for him. The MC quickly confirms the message and promises to go meet the Viscount right now. Looking at his sister, Aster comments that the clothes she is wearing are very different from her normal style. The girl tilts her head, not understanding the reason for the sudden observation. He explains it's rare to see her in training gear, remembering she hated wearing clothes that weren't cute or elegant. Alphen confesses that watching her brother fight made her realize she needs to find a balance and change her own stance for the future. Understanding the warrior's new determination, the boy listens closely to what she has to say. Pointing a wooden blade at his face, the young woman confidently warns that the two of them will train a lot together when he gets back. The MC breaks into a genuine and happy smile seeing his protector's willpower. Walking out of the dirt yard, Aster casually asks her to go easy on him in their next session. Arriving at the Viscount's isolated office, the young man gives a few light knocks on the large door. He asks for permission politely and steps into the room, which is fully lit by the afternoon sun. Sitting at his desk, Hyfried asks the boy to take a seat so they can start the conversation. Aster obeys promptly, settling into the armchair across from his adoptive father. The Viscount starts the topic by recalling that it has been 10 years since they took the boy into that very house. Placing a small velvet box on the table, the man confesses he planned to wait for the youth to grow a little more before acting. Curious about the luxurious object, the MC asks what that ring with an embedded red stone is all about. Hyfried reveals with a serious tone that this jewel is the official proof of succession for the house's next leader. Surprised, Aster listens as the patriarch states he wants to pass the Viscounty leadership directly to him. The noble explains that the family's position in the current political landscape is extremely fragile and delicate. Despite carrying the Elmheim surname, they are in charge of guarding a territory full of heavy responsibilities. Because of this constant pressure, the man emphasizes he can't leave the successor's seat empty for much longer. Worried about the harmony of the home, the boy asks if his sisters agree with this sudden decision. The Viscount lets him know the other daughters will return from the Night Academy in 3 days, and he plans to talk to everyone at once. At this, the MC imagines the return of Martha and the feared sister Kudo to the mansion. He deduces with a tense smile that the girls, especially the hot-headed warrior, are going to be furious with this choice. After all, the young woman always hated the adopted boy simply for the fact that he is a male and possesses great magical power. Refusing the offer immediately, Aster gets up from the armchair and declares there's absolutely zero way he can accept the leadership. He argues he is still an immature rookie, unable to control his own magic, reminding him that he almost hurt his sister in the past because of it. The MC adds that he has zero confidence to convince his sisters to accept what they consider an injustice. Finding this premature maturity amusing, Hyfried confesses he sometimes doubts if the boy was ever really an innocent child. Accepting the temporary refusal, the father grabs a long, dark wooden box and mentions the ring would just be one of the rewards for his performance at the assembly. However, opening the heavy lid slowly, the noble guesses his son will like this other gift much more. The boy instantly widens his eyes as he recognizes the heavy aura of the object kept inside. In the box rests Graham, the devouring magic weapon, capable of enduring and stabilizing even the fury of his 7 wings. Right after this revelation, the two walk away from the palace and head to an isolated area in the forest to test the artifact safely. Aster asks if the training dojo wouldn't be enough, but the man guarantees it's much better to prevent any kind of accident. Joking around, Hyfried reminds him that the boy has the terrible habit of destroying the property quite often. Holding what looks like just the hilt of the weapon, the leader explains the demonic sword was recovered from the main family, especially for him. With a completely focused look, the Viscount grips the relic's metallic handle tightly. The MC reacts startled, trying to understand how that can be used in a real confrontation. Watching the artifact emit particles of light, the youth questions how that is a sword, since it has zero visible blade. With a swift motion, Hyfried injects his aura into the hilt and creates an immense, scarlet energy blade. He explains that the weapon has infinite potential and only reaches its complete form by absorbing the life power of whoever uses it. The brute display of force creates a colossal energy pillar that shoots straight up toward the forest clouds. The absolute slash tears the sky and leaves a circular trail of destruction that spreads a strong wind through the air. The Viscount warns that the relic has a dark reputation and can drain the life of anyone unlucky enough to have weak magic. Pointing the glowing hilt at the MC, the father asks if he has enough courage to try wielding this hazard. Without hesitating for one single second, Aster grabs the thick handle with his two hands. The boy starts transferring his own heavy aura into the relic, completely braced for the kickback. In the next instant, a massive explosion of golden power sweeps the entire forest in a strong shockwave. Struggling to keep a firm stance, the MC gets spooked, realizing the tool is draining his energy on its own. A gigantic beam of light shoots from the weapon straight up, lighting up the entire region like a lighthouse. Back in the mansion's courtyard, the knights panic, shouting that a comet or something just took off from the ground. Far from the mess, Alphen watches the magical anomaly rising intensely on the forest horizon. Flashing a proud smile, the girl instantly concludes that her little brother is the one and only person responsible for that absurd flash. Kneeling in the dirt and panting, Aster laughs in relief, holding the stabilized blade, realizing the tool is perfect for his revenge. Completely blown away, Hefford mutters that the most unbelievable part of all this is seeing the absurd power his son possesses. A huge pillar of energy keeps slicing the clouds while the father watches the display of strength. The Viscount points out there is zero historical record of anyone carrying the feared 7 wings in the family's bloodline. He guarantees that if the young man fully masters this miracle, one day he will become an unbeatable swordsman. Staring into the void, the MC reflects on the real possibility of overcoming the ruthless Duke in the future. The leader, however, warns that carrying a colossal power like that will inevitably attract a lot of conflict. The man explains that if the truth about the 7 wings goes public, the consequences for the house will be disastrous. Some will feel immense envy, while others will definitely try to use the boy as a political tool. Besides, the Viscount warns there will be enemies willing to eliminate the boy for good, considering him a major obstacle. Reaching out his hand, the father advises his adopted son to prepare so he doesn't regret his own weakness down the road. With that, he firmly asks the heir to train intensely to become as strong as possible right now. Shaking the noble's hand, Aster promises himself he will never again live a miserable life like his past. Gripping the metallic handle, the boy thanks his father and guarantees he will master the sword and his supreme magic. 3 days later, the leader and his wife wait in the palace's main hall to welcome who just arrived. It's the moment when sisters Martha and Kudo return from the Night Academy and formally present themselves to the family. After clearing her throat to grab everyone's attention, Kudo, the short-haired warrior, breaks her formal posture. She opens her arms excitedly, demanding a big welcome back hug from her lovely little sisters. However, the girl's warm reception goes entirely to Martha, leaving the red-haired knight completely ignored in the hall. Confused by the situation, the young woman asks from afar why nobody came running to hug her too. One of the girls answers honestly that they avoid contact because the warrior always ruins their hairstyles. Crossing her arms, Kudo looks away and lies, saying someone so refined in chivalry would never do something rough like that. Right after, the newcomer notices Alphen's presence, who was standing further back in the main hall. Wasting zero time, the redhead rushes over and crushes her little sister in a tight hug because she missed her. While the younger one tries to escape complaining about her pushy attitude, the warrior rubs her face against hers without a care. Stopping the joke suddenly, Kudel asks her parents where their adopted brother ran off to. Looking out the window next to his wife, Heffried calmly points in the direction where the boy can be found. The young woman focuses her gaze outside, already imagining the scene she is about to witness. Far away, a violent explosion of scarlet energy lights up the territory's dense forest. Panting, Aster keeps training intensely in the woods with the massive strikes of the devouring sword. Frustrated with his own performance, he complains about still not having managed to stabilize the magic the right way. The boy notices he can even form the energy blade, but the most he can do right now is force its suppression. Tired, he wonders how the Viscount managed to wield that relic so naturally and effortlessly. Interrupting his thoughts, Kudo appears walking through the trees, highly ironically praising the light show. The boy notices his sister's arrival, who already starts complaining about his lack of manners for not going to welcome her at the palace. Keeping the mocking tone, the warrior comments that he's acting very cold with his own family. Sitting on a rock, the young woman deduces out loud that the fame gained at the assembly got to the little prodigy's head. Trying to dodge a fight, the MC congratulates his sister for standing out in several difficult missions at the academy. He specifically mentions he heard she was the one and only rookie to receive the honorable platinum medal that year. Standing up calmly with her training weapon in hand, Kudo states she needs that spotlight to inherit Hivory's position. With a suddenly harsher look, the girl reveals she already knows the boy rejected the talk about the house's succession. Aster denies any intention to offend her, explaining he just considers himself disqualified for the job at the moment. This diplomatic excuse only serves to make the warrior's expression even more tense and annoyed. Feeling the vibe get extremely heavy in the air, the boy takes one step back on pure instinct. Wielding her wooden sword, the redhead accuses her brother of being very cruel, since he knows very well what her biggest dream is. The sudden aggression leaves the MC paralyzed for a fraction of a second in the forest. Without giving any warning, the newcomer lunges at high speed, leaving a trail of blue aura behind. She unleashes a brutal diagonal slash that forces the boy to jump back quickly to avoid being split in two. The strike misses Aster, but hits the ground so hard it shatters the rocks of the scenery in a crushing impact. Backing away to a safe distance, the boy demands to know the reason for that surprise attack out of nowhere. Ignoring his outrage, the opponent announces that the time has come to test her brother's skills after so much time. Assuming a combat stance, the female knight firmly warns that her next attack won't be a joke. Desperate about the situation, the MC asks her to stop, warning that his control over the magic relic is still incomplete. Kudo replies dryly, asking if he would use that same pathetic excuse if he were facing a real enemy. The cold phrase spoken by the warrior hits the young mage like a massive reality check. Leaping forward once more, the adversary warns that a knight must fight at all times as if they were on the battlefield. Seeing the overwhelming charge approach, the young man understands that the fight has definitely ceased to be just a provocation. Under pressure, he could barely manage his own mana reserve while trying to react to her heavy offensive. With no way out against the opponent's intense intent, the heir focuses his energy on the sword's hilt to survive. The boy blocks his sister's relentless attack, generating a violent clash between the two auras in the middle of the woods. The direct clash results in a massive explosion of blue and scarlet power that sweeps the dust and shakes the surrounding trees. Still in the air, Kudo praises her brother's agility for managing to keep up with her enhanced movements. However, pressing the blade with force, the warrior goes back to criticizing the lame excuse involving the incomplete relic. Forcing her target back with the impact, the girl condemns the fact that his magic control remains a complete mess. After pushing him, she quickly lands on the grass and flexes her legs, preparing a new aggressive advance. Breaking into a cold sweat at the relentless sequence, Aster remembers that the warrior has always been ruthless like this. Standing amidst the dust rising in the clearing, the young woman awaits her target's next reaction. The MC recalls the past, remembering that the simple fact of him being the only male successor already generated a lot of friction between them. The knight never accepted that an orphan carried a higher magic emblem than hers, using any excuse to demand duels during their childhood. In those memories, little Aster always got the short end of the stick, trying to block the brutal blows of the redhead storm. Returning to the fierce reality of the combat, the boy concludes with certainty that his sister and protector, in fact, is his natural rival. Admiring Aster's successful defense, the adversary briefly praises him before resuming the confrontation with even more drive. Without giving him a break, Kudo lands a devastating vertical strike right on the MC's red magic defense. Displaying an intimidating fury, she yells that the brat has absolutely no qualifications to lead the house. Far from there, at the palace, Alphen watches the magic explosion in the forest and asks, worried, if their father should really have left them alone. Staring at the landscape calmly, Hefrid acknowledges that this little sibling squabble might end up getting out of hand. However, observing the fight from afar, the Viscount comments that the two make great rivals and guarantees that the situation won't end in tragedy. Alphen shows clear concern and confesses she hopes her father is actually right about that. Changing the subject, the girl questions the real reason the sisters were called back, suspecting it wasn't just to talk about the succession. Confirming his daughter's suspicions, Hefrid opens a small wooden box that was on his desk. The young woman's eyes widen, immediately recognizing the gravity of the object stored inside. The noble takes out a letter sealed with red wax, revealing it to be a direct summons from the main house. He explains that the elders in control of the Elmheim family wish to see the new adopted grandson in person. Understanding the weight of the situation, the girl agrees that this is an extremely serious problem for all of them. The Viscount admits in a tenser tone that, in the worst-case scenario, they might end up losing Aster for good. While this conversation takes place in the forest, the fierce clash between the two youths continues to kick up dust and tear up the environment. Blocking the successive attacks, the boy asks his sister to stop the madness, repeating that he has already refused the offer to lead the house. The justification only serves to annoy Kudo even more, making her prepare another super heavy strike. The knight brings the blade down with full force, forcing the target to focus 100% of his defense to avoid being crushed. Pressured by the raw impact, Aster feels as if he were dealing with a monster swinging a giant hammer. The weight of the attack is so great that it makes the boy's arms tremble under the strong pressure of the charge. Taking advantage of the boy's retreat, the warrior pushes her opponent back in a rough slide across the dirt floor. Trying to catch his breath, the young man begs her to finally listen to what he has to say. Interrupting his speech, Kudo flashes a teasing smile and accuses her little brother of having just run away from direct combat. At that moment, a new explosion of aura tears through the scene and pushes the two apart in a powerful shockwave. Completely out of breath, the MC struggles to keep dealing with his sister's absurd brute force. Wielding her training blade with mastery, the young woman decrees that simply swinging a sword from side to side is a third-rate attitude. Keeping her posture firm on the grass, she adds that focusing only on controlling your own magic makes you a second-rate individual. The knight states with conviction that only by mastering the path of the sword together with magic can someone be considered top tier. Resting the weapon on her shoulder out of boredom, Kudo lets out a heavy sigh and confesses to being very disappointed with the boy's level. She explains that the difference in the emblems directly reflects the amount of power each one can handle, and that a single extra wing changes everything. Therefore, the girl acknowledges that her rank of 5 wings loses badly in firepower to his 7-wing emblem. Even with this obvious advantage, she criticizes the fact that the heir keeps running away from a frank and direct confrontation. With a mocking smile, the young woman asks if he doesn't trust his own ability to use the sword to win. The warrior hits his weak spot by deducing that the opponent is, in fact, afraid of losing control again, just like he did in the past. The spot-on provocation leaves the young man paralyzed for a moment, wondering if he really is still afraid of his own power. Staring at his own weapon, the MC realizes that he spent all this time putting an unconscious limiter on his strength. He finally figures out that the relic's instability happens because he tries to forcibly suppress the magic instead of letting it flow freely. Noticing his hesitation, the warrior releases a frightening amount of blue aura and warns that the boy was born with everything she always wanted. Stepping firmly on the ground, the young woman declares that if the orphan is going to waste this gift, then she will take it for herself. In an aggressive and relentless advance, the opponent demands that her brother hand over all that strength to her right now. Now ready for the charge, Aster grips the metallic hilt with all the firmness he has. The direct clash of the weapons generates a massive explosion that kicks up rocks and breaks the forest scenery. Impressed by the perfect block, the knight steps back, realizing that her full-force strike was repelled without any effort. Flashing a confident smile with his eyes shining, the boy thanks his older sister for making him wake up to reality. As the young woman lands, she notices in confusion that the boy is advancing for the attack without even forming the scarlet light blade on the sword. Assuming a defensive stance, Kudo is sure that he didn't run out of magic after the last destructive impact. Leaping with everything he has, the heir prepares the strike using only the handle, now focused on the inexhaustible power hidden in his crest. At the exact moment of the attack, he releases all the concentrated magic at once in an absurd and overwhelming explosion. Struggling hard to hold the line, the adversary immediately recognizes that this reckless tactic was a genius move on his part. Focused on his goal, Aster assures himself that he has absolutely no intention of wasting his new chance at living. Letting the emblem shine intensely on his back, the MC decides that he will no longer hesitate to use his true strength. In his mind, he reflects that, in his past life, no matter how much status he achieved, he felt he had never truly owned anything. Confused by the sudden speech, he mutters, the adversary doesn't understand what second wife her little brother is talking about. Without giving her time to think, Aster injects even more magic into the relic to end the fight once and for all. Using the momentum of his own body, the young man pressures the opponent with a relentless advance. Surprised by the sudden burst of energy, Kudo gets startled by the colossal amount of power expanding inches from her face. The warrior's wooden weapon begins to completely disintegrate as she tries to hold back the force of the devouring blade. Promising not to hold back anymore, the boy projects the direct attack against his older sister's chest in an overwhelming move. The knight's eyes widen as she feels the fierce impact hit her squarely in the middle of the battlefield. Aster finishes the brutal charge in a whirlwind of scarlet light that illuminates the entire forest area. Sometime later, the short-haired warrior wakes up very confused, lying in a comfortable bed. Looking at the sunlight hitting the bedroom window, she tries to understand how she ended up back at the palace. A familiar voice breaks the silence, asking in a calm tone if the young woman has finally woken up from her deep slumber. Near the curtain, Alphen adjusts the folds of the fabric and remarks that the newcomer slept for quite a while. Jumping up in a fright, Kudo interrupts her sister to ask desperately what happened to the fencing match in the forest. With a calm smile, Alphen says that it was Aster himself who carried her on his back to the mansion, completely safe. The girl explains that the boy lied to the rest of the family, saying that the warrior had merely passed out from the exhaustion of the long trip. Looking down at the bed, Kudo murmurs that this was obviously not true. Recalling the end of the confrontation, she admits that at the last second, she thought she would actually be cut in half by the demonic sword. However, the young woman now understands that the MC undid the magic blade a fraction of a second before the overwhelming impact. What knocked her out wasn't a real cut, but just the heavy wave of residual magic that passed through her body in the collision. In her memory, the knight acknowledges that the gentle boy would never hurt one of his own sisters on purpose. Even so, his intimidating presence in that final second made her believe she was going to be ended in cold blood. Showing a smirk, the young woman concludes that her little brother has grown up and become someone full of annoying surprises. Picking up the training sword that was on the bedroom floor, she demands to know where the brat is hiding right now. Determined to turn the tables, Kudo grips the weapon and warns that she totally refuses to accept such a shameful defeat. While the warrior promises to fight with full force next time, Alphen states casually that the boy has already left home. The sudden news cuts through all the excitement, leaving the defeated girl completely lost with the information. Turning to the room, the noble explains that the patriarch and Aster have just left for the main house due to an urgent summons. The shocking news catches Kudo so off guard that she just stands paralyzed, in silence, processing everything she just heard. At the palace, the warrior lets out a desperate scream out the window as soon as she discovers the news of her target's sudden departure. Far from there, the Viscount's carriage advances smoothly along the stone road towards the city. Inside the vehicle, Aster watches the landscape through the window with a serene expression during the trip. To prepare him, Hyfrid explains that they are on their way to a meeting with the former leaders of the main family and its branches. The Viscount points out that, even retired, these shadow rulers still exert immense influence over the Elmheim house. Confused, the man sighs and says he finds it very strange that the elders demand the boy's presence, since they spent years completely ignoring him. Showing no concern, the MC deduces that this sudden call has to do with the events of the Sword Dance Festival. The young man recalls the rumors that the veterans of the main lineage value the clan's honor more than gold or their own lives. Casually, he comments that anyone who soils this pride is usually thrown to the monsters of the house as a brutal punishment. Surprised by the boy's calmness in the face of this threat, Hyfrid immediately asks where he heard such a scary story. Aster just brushes it off with a vague gesture, ensuring he is fully prepared to deal with an exile or even a secret elimination. Worried about the heir's coldness, the patriarch changes the subject and asks if he really wanted to leave the mansion without saying goodbye. With his head down, the boy states that it was the best choice, remembering that he already planned to leave as soon as the sisters returned anyway. He justifies it by saying that his older sister has always hated him, so the knight will be able to live in peace without his unwanted presence there. Resting his hand on the training weapon, the young man acknowledges that, thanks to the fierce clash in the woods, he finally understood how to manipulate his magic relic. Feeling ready for the worst, Aster asks his father not to try to save him under any circumstances from now on. Annoyed by this audacity, Hyfrid scolds the absurd idea of the youngest in the family trying to play the lone hero in a wolf's den. The Viscount's lecture, however, is cut short when a loud rumble violently shakes the structure of the carriage. The MC's eye widens in shock as he feels a very familiar aura approaching in an instant. To the passenger's surprise, Kudo appears furiously clinging to the side of the cabin while it's in full motion on the road. The young man is in disbelief when he notices that his recently awakened sister ran all the way down the street on foot just to catch them in time. Jumping through the window with agility, the warrior criticizes her target's silent escape and reveals she already knows everything about the elder's urgent summons. Without wasting time, the adoptive father warns his daughter about the severe consequences of going to the main base without a formal invitation. Sitting down comfortably, the young woman assures him that she perfectly understands her obligation to protect the mansion in the leader's absence. However, she counters by saying that a call of this magnitude requires the family to pay maximum attention to the imminent danger. The knight also recalls the words of her other sister, who feared that the boy would find a way to disappear forever. Trying to calm things down, Aster says he is just going to have a civil conversation, although he hides the uncertainty of managing to return safely. Cutting off this false optimism, the short-haired warrior points her finger in the heir's face and openly declares that she detests him with all her might. She lists her frustrations, condemning the fact that he carries the supremacy of the 7 wings and still receives successor privileges. What annoys her the most, however, is the adopted brat's habit of acting like an independent adult, instead of assuming his position as the youngest brother. Despite the countless complaints, Kudo relaxes her posture and confesses that, deep down, he remains a precious member of the family. Resting her head on the window with a tired expression, she decrees that the boy will always be her little brother, no matter what strength he acquires. With a steady gaze, the warrior states that the heir has the absolute obligation to return safely so that the two can have a fair rematch in the future. Oozing confidence, she warns that she doesn't intend to let the history of battles between them end in that crushing defeat. After giving her message clearly, the girl simply turns her back and jumps out of the moving vehicle back onto the road. Without quite understanding the purpose of that crazy invasion, the young man reflects on the scene while Hyfrid just finds the rivalry between the two amusing. Out of her sight, Aster goes back to staring out the window, feeling genuinely grateful for this sincere concern disguised as anger. Watching the stone streets fall behind, the MC makes a firm promise to survive at all costs to return to the mansion. After completing the long journey, the carriage finally passes through the massive iron gates of the Elmheim fortress. A troop of armored soldiers immediately welcomes the Viscount, robotically informing him that the upper waiters are already waiting for him inside. Heffrey tries to wave off the courtesy, claiming to know the house well, but the guard insists that orders require a mandatory escort. Surrounded by spears, the patriarch immediately notices that the oppressive pressure of the castle resembles that of prisoners being led to the gallows. Not letting himself be shaken by the explicit hostility, Aster accompanies the man with his head held high. The heavy atmosphere of that immense environment under the stained sky awakens an uncomfortable nostalgia in the reincarnated one's past life memories. Walking through the corridors, the Viscount breaks the silence to prepare the boy for the real tension they will find in the hall. He instructs his son not to lose his composure during the trial and to overlook any absurd offense thrown by the big shots. Quite tense, the patriarch explains that the boy's manners are not the problem, but rather the uncontrollable instability of those rulers. While receiving these vital instructions, Aster ends up getting distracted by noises coming from a nearby arena. He notices Darius's absence from the training courtyard and coldly deduces that the hand crushed at the festival took the rival out of combat indefinitely. Noticing his companion's lack of focus, the secondary leader asks severely if he is even listening to the warnings. Turning his focus back to the path, the MC puts on an innocent face and nods, pretending not to have missed a single word. Deep down, the young mage swears that he will act perfectly in his answers, just to ensure he fulfills the promise made to his sister. Ending the walk, the duo stops in front of the immense gates of the noble hall, which are pushed open by the castle's sentinels. An announcer calls out the arrival of the Viscount and his companion to the assembly plunged into partial darkness. Occupying the center of the space, the newcomer hears a voice echo from the back, commenting on the decades he has been away from the family. Hidden in the shadows, the mysterious old man provokes the noble with sharp irony, calling him by the title of Dear Grandson. Immediately recognizing the supreme authority, the Viscount takes a knee on the floor, assuming the utmost reverence before the figure. He greets the relentless leader with extreme formal respect, correcting his own slip to call him great-grandfather. Standing next to his prostrated father, Aster evaluates the elder, aware that he is the great monster hidden in the shadows of Elmheim. Zenith assumes his post at the top of the food chain, revealing his eye patch and an intimidating look that prove the title of sixth ruler. Sweeping the hostile environment with his eyes, the MC identifies the counselors and strategists who command the banner's military forces. He easily notices that the faces of that elite are the same ones that were cheering in the luxurious chairs during the sword festival. However, the young man quickly notices an anomaly in the meeting. The current Duke Rodri is nowhere in the room. Settled on his throne, Zenith guesses the target's thoughts and confirms that the leader of the 8th generation did not show up for the reckoning. The old man grumbles that the great commander is too busy serving the crown to deal with petty incidents, leaving the dirty work to the veterans. Aster processes the scenario, understanding that in his previous incarnation, he was taken out before he even achieved enough fame to cross paths with this council. The heir also realizes that the audacity of gathering the army's top brass behind the current duke's back exposes the enormous influence that Zenith still holds. Interrupting the reflection, Hefrid swallows his pride and cautiously dares to ask which incident his great-grandfather is talking about. The shadow monster lets out a raspy laugh, mocking the fact that the Viscount is trying to play dumb in the face of the scandal. Exposing the pretext for the trial, Zenith hatefully cites the episode at the festival where the adopted youth dared to mutilate Darius's precious talent. Confirming the scenario he predicted at the beginning of the trip, the MC just faces the situation, aware of the imminent retaliation for the public affront. Trying to prevent the disaster, the patriarch pleads for fairness, recalling that Rodri himself intervened and officially declared the dispute over on the very same day. The nobles react to the argument with blind fury, accusing the Duke's words of being mere theater and demanding reparations for the outrage. Backed by his unquestionable power, the old man sentences the useless adopted boy to permanent exile and promises severe physical punishment to Hefrid for his insolence. Desperate at seeing his family fall apart, the leader of the secondary house abandons his submissive position and demands that the elder's fury fall solely upon him. Surprised by his father's attitude, Aster tries to intervene, warning that the man has nothing to do with the festival incident. The Viscount just closes his eyes in silence, completely ignoring his son's warning. Seeing the determination on the patriarch's face, the boy realizes that he won't be able to make him back down from the decision. From the back of the hall, a voice scolds the young man, saying he has no manners for trying to interrupt the adult's conversation. From atop his throne, Zenith reminds everyone that the Elmheim family leads an overwhelming force of 12,000 knights. The old counselor explains that, despite this colossal power, the minds of so many warriors don't always think alike. He reveals that many ambitious knights watch the house closely, just waiting for the chance to seize supreme power. The ruler points out that, naturally, some of these dangerous individuals are present right there in the room. Standing up, the elder states that the elite only wants peace of mind, and the boy still hasn't proven that he isn't an internal threat to the family. At that moment, the shadow monster rests the tip of his cane on the patriarch's neck, leaving him tense. Pressing the magic weapon against the noble's skin, the old man asks if he still remembers the past. The sixth leader coldly recalls the day he forced Rodri to tear off the Viscount's arm as punishment for failing to protect the Lord. With a ruthless look, Zenith demands that Hefrid make up for this old failure by taking his own adopted son's head right then and there. Faced with this cruel order, the boy just widens his eye, taken by the tension of the moment. Maintaining his position on the floor, the adoptive father firmly refuses the order and warns that the matter is closed. The patriarch states that he prefers to give his own life, rather than take out his son, leaving Aster completely moved by his loyalty. Curing the disobedience, the old leader turns his back and accepts the choice with total disdain. Right after that, he slams his heavy cane hard against the stone floor of the hall. Sentencing the fate of everyone, the monster decrees the Viscount's execution, including his wife, daughters, and the boy in the ultimate punishment. Declaring the definitive end of the secondary house, Zenith orders the attack and the knights advance with swords drawn against the duo. Surrounded by enemy blades, the adoptive father quickly grips his weapon to try to protect his family. But the MC steps forward before the combat and asks the reason for so much fear on the part of his great-grandfather. Bothered by the sudden boldness, the commander stops and looks over his shoulder, not understanding the provocation in the middle of an execution. The young man mocks the pathetic attitude of the adults huddling in panic, afraid of being bitten by their own dog. Tearing his shirt, the boy warns that he would accept any punishment quietly unless they threatened his family. Behind him, Hefrid is paralyzed with shock seeing the boy's extreme attitude before a council of war. Releasing a wave of energy that blows the rags of clothing away, Aster apologizes to his father and confesses that he is terrible at staying quiet. The fierce impact of the magic aura makes the armored soldiers step back, breaking into a cold sweat before that unexpected sight. On the boy's skin, the immense and legendary scarlet mark of the 7 wings begins to shine intensely, much to the shock of everyone present. Engulfed in a whirlpool of destructive light, he decrees that if they touch the Viscounty, that supreme power will destroy the entire main lineage. Facing the end head-on, the heir challenges the supreme leader to think very carefully about what he is going to do next. Zenith turns his whole body, completely in disbelief as he recognizes the unattainable crest stamped on the brat's back. The other elders begin to sweat cold and desperately question if the mark is fake, since it hadn't appeared on a human in centuries. Even in the face of general panic, Count Maze admits out loud that this monstrous energy is genuine. Breaking the tense silence, the shadow monster calls the boy's attention with a heavy voice. Without taking his eyes off the emblem, the old man asks if the adopted youth has any real idea of what that mark means to the world. Flaunting total confidence, the MC simply answers that he knows the more wings there are, the more people get scared of him. The mocking reply in the middle of a deadly trial makes the suited count burst into hysterical laughter in his chair. Wiping a tear from the corner of his eye, the man apologizes for the interruption and tells the trial to continue. Taking the floor again, the 6th ruler explains that the crest is a magic-generating organ granted by spirits in ancient times. He continues the lesson, detailing that this ancestral power was passed down from generation to generation by noble bloodlines. Thanks to this continuous process, humanity managed to refine and deepen its magic strength to its current limits. However, the leader points out that no one in history has ever reached the 7th wing, except the ancient spiritual clan itself. Already out of patience for the history lesson, the young man asks sharply if the old man is implying that he is a reincarnated ancient spirit. Ignoring the impatience, the patriarch warns that if the overwhelming power displayed there is indeed real, things change completely. Behind the rebel heir, Hefrid remains silent, trying to process the absurd turn the sentencing has taken. Taking a firm step forward, Aster ignores any theory about his past and states firmly that he is just a son of the Viscounty. The mage declares that his origin doesn't matter and demands to know right now if the top brass is going to make him an enemy. He points out that, even facing exile, several other elite military families would give anything to welcome his supreme string. With a predatory look, the young man states that he would become a gigantic threat by surpassing Duke Rodri himself in the future. The audacity of comparing his power to that of the current leader of the main family leaves the counselors shocked. The boy predicts that his survival outside the house would inevitably result in a colossal civil conflict that would tear the country apart. Pointing to his own glowing chest, he demands that the council decide right there who will be on his side and who will be wiped out. Annoyed by this monumental arrogance, the old man clashes head-on, questioning if the brat really thinks he is worth that much. The shadow monster coldly argues that there is still no real proof that the flames on his back are legitimate. Showing pure mockery, the MC challenges the elders to try and take him down right now if they doubt his capability so much. Returning the fury in the same tone, the one-eyed monster promises that a direct clash in that hall would start the very conflict mentioned. Gripping the handle of his cane tightly, the old man internally acknowledges that the boy has enough power to easily annihilate him in an instant. At that moment, the sound of a finger snap echoes suddenly, cutting the intense tension between the two combatants. Getting up from his chair calmly, the blue-haired count comments that this threatening argument is not going to lead anywhere. Taking the lead of the council, the man suggests that the best way out is to give a perilous challenge to the arrogant youth to test him. One of the veterans tries to scold him for the absurd idea, but the count counters by pointing out that everyone there is dying to see the real strength of the mark. Maintaining his relaxed posture, the noble concludes that the group can decide the fate of the condemned after he tries to survive. Turning to the ruler, the suited man suggests that the greatest martial clan on the continent must have perfect arenas for brutal tests. Observing the skillful manipulation of that counselor, the mage memorizes the name, Maze, with quite a bit of tactical interest. In his analytical mind, the MC immediately comes to the conclusion that this man just revealed himself as a valuable ally. Convinced by the logic of the challenge, the relentless great-grandfather taps his cane and orders the adopted boy to follow him immediately. Walking right past the heir, the elder mumbles that applying a harsh correction to a cheeky grandson is also part of the family's duties. The group arrives at a massive iron passage that opens, revealing a dark and scary abyss right below. This area in the depths of the castle works as an immense underground bunker directly connected to the sewer system. Staring into the pitch black, the elder reports that the place was created for evacuations, but ended up becoming the perfect lair to lock up an out-of-control beast. Next to the trench, the Viscount quietly scolds the boy, reminding him that he warned him several times never to reveal the mark recklessly. Far from feeling fear, the mage assures his father that he wouldn't be able to hide his trump card forever, and considers this the ideal chance to test it in combat. Accepting the irreversible decision, the patriarch pleads for his son not to lower his guard down there no matter what. Holding tight to the iron chains, the boy jumps eagerly into the depths of the abyss, ready for the takedown. Watching the boy fall through the grates, Maze maintains a look of deep curiosity about what is going to happen next. Down there, the MC lands smoothly in the water and realizes that the place is pitch black. However, his eyes take on a golden glow as he tells himself that the darkness is not enough to blind him. Right after, he focuses his vision upon noticing something large moving in the deep shadows of the pit. Looking up at the light coming from the grate high above, the young man remembers that the leader gave Darius the chance to clear his own name in that very same place. He recalls that his cousin just stayed crying pathetically, to the point of making it pitiful to watch. The memory is interrupted by heavy footsteps echoing through the water, while the silhouette of a colossal beast approaches. Holding the handle of his sword firmly, the mage provokes the creature, asking not to be disappointed in the fight. A monstrous lion made of blue flames leaps roaring furiously, marking the beginning of Aster's trial. Standing before the monster, he realizes that the rumors about the family hiding a magic beast were completely real. The young man even feels a slight empathy for his spoiled cousin for being born into a clan infested with deadly beasts of that kind. Without wasting time, the gigantic animal charges at high speed, firing continuous attacks and ricocheting off the walls. High above, the counselors are startled by the sudden intensity of the lightning-fast attack in the pit, but the heir dodges everything with ease, commenting that he is much more afraid of his sister Kudo than of that thing. Furious with the evasion, the creature leaps towards him again to try and shred him with its sharp claws. In the middle of exchanging blows, the boy's look changes upon noticing a bizarre detail on the beast's body. The monster's skin reveals several skulls and agonizing souls trapped in its rotting flesh. With the creature roaring right in front of him, he finally realizes he is dealing with an undead. Terrified by the discovery, Hyfried shouts from the balcony, asking why on earth they keep an abomination like that in the basement. Showing pure malice in his gaze, Patriarch Zenith answers calmly that the beast loves the smell of decay. The old man explains that he put it there to devour the corpses of the house since the lion is immune to cuts and fire. He even brags that the beast became the perfect solution to make the unwanted bodies of the main family disappear without a trace. Worried, one of the blonde counselors points out that an undead is an absurd challenge even for experienced knights. The man questions if the leader's real intention is simply to eliminate the bearer of the 7 wings right there without giving him a chance to defend himself. In the depths of the pit, the boy continues to listen attentively to the entire discussion while dodging the attacks. Taking the floor again, Zenith decrees that if the young man perishes, it is because the crest's power was nothing but a useless sham. On the other side of the grate, the blue-haired count just lets out a discreet laugh at the extreme situation. In his thoughts, Maze roots for the boy not to lose his life so easily after showing so much potential in the throne room. While the adults talk above, the monster fires continuous blasts of energy at the boy below. Deflecting the charge, Aster concludes that conventional physical attacks are completely useless against that thing. Evaluating the enemy, the MC notes that the regeneration of that beast far surpasses that of any common undead. Staring at the beast, he tries to quickly remember the right way to definitively eliminate that specific type of creature. Logic dictates that it would be necessary to purify it using sunlight, absolute flames, or weapons bathed in holy magic. The problem is that the boy has none of that at his disposal, making a direct confrontation a huge mistake due to the lack of proper options. Even so, showing total confidence, he warns that retreating is not an option and that tricks do not matter for the one who possesses the 7 wings. Channeling an absurd amount of aura, the heir decides that the time has come to show his true worth. The hilt of his weapon generates a colossal red blade, and the boy delivers a raw strike to crush the abomination. The thunderous impact of the demonic sword against the ground kicks up a thick cloud of dust and destroys the entire floor of the pit. Up there, the overwhelming pressure of the magic throws the blonde counselor backwards, leaving everyone amazed by the brute force released. Clinging to the grates, the other nobles stare at the destruction below, wondering if the beast has finally been defeated. Showing no reaction of surprise, the shadow monster continues to observe the result of the attack coldly. When the smoke clears a bit, the mage is seen in the center of the crater, holding his own arm after the great effort. Evaluating the scene without enthusiasm, the patriarch shakes his head and murmurs that the boy was a disappointment in the end. Suddenly, the beast emerges completely unharmed from the rubble and charges at top speed through the air. With no time to dodge, the MC takes a direct hit that throws him fiercely against the ground. Giving no chance for recovery, the phantom lion takes a gigantic leap with its jaws open, ready to devour him. Seeing his son about to be torn apart, Heffrade shouts his name in total despair, banging against the grate. Promptly, the blue count steps in front of the adoptive father, warning him not to make the mistake of trying to interfere with the test. Completely distressed, the Viscount asks if the man expects him to just stand there, watching his boy meet his end. Maintaining his usual calmness, Maze just asks him to pay attention to how the combat unfolds below. The counselor points out that the cheeky young man clearly still has an ace up his sleeve for that critical situation. During the fall, the MC gets excited when he realizes that his risky initial tactic had an effect on the creature. The beast lands on the ground engulfed in scarlet flames, and the mage notices that it has shrunk considerably due to the previous wound. Aster's aura overflows uncontrollably as he absorbs the beast's vitality with his demonic sword. Taking advantage of the opening during his descent, he comes down with everything and drives the glowing blade straight into the back of the already weakened monster. Oozing ruthlessness, the boy warns that he will repeat that same piercing process until the abomination disappears for good. He twists the weapon relentlessly, creating a vortex of destructive magic that begins to rapidly disintegrate the target. Watching the scene, Heffrade freezes as he recognizes the same frightening technique his son used only once in the past. The impact of the attack generates a tornado of red energy so dense that it swallows the beast whole in an instant. The crushing pressure of the pillar of power makes the structure give way, and the nobles panic as the balcony floor collapses. Running to get away from the edge, the elders yell at each other while the stone floor crumbles completely into the abyss. Standing amidst the chaos, the patriarch finally widens his eyes as he understands the true magnitude of that phenomenon before him. Flaunting pure arrogance inside the whirlwind of flames, Aster displays the calamity of the 7 Wings power in its entirety. As soon as the magic storm ceases, the fallen counselors try to understand what just devastated the environment so fiercely. Staring into the depths in shock, one of the guards questions where the undead lion ended up after all. Analyzing the damage, Zenith deduces that the boy simply crushed the immortal monster until there was absolutely nothing left. The leader admits that erasing a creature like that by swallowing it in a magic vortex is not something just anyone can do. Resting the sword on his shoulder, the MC takes a deep breath down below while the old man concludes that he won using pure brute force alone. Taking advantage of the general shock, Maze approaches the supreme ruler and asks if that was also part of the original plan. Beside them, Heffrade recovers his posture, feeling immense pride in the astonishing growth his adopted son achieved in battle. Getting straight to the point, the blue-haired count asks if the young man has finally passed the perilous test imposed by the council. With an expression of disdain, the monster decrees that it would be impossible for anyone there to have any objection after that flawless takedown. Confirming the victory, Maze calls out loud and clear to the boy in the pit that he passed the exam. Standing in the middle of the crater, he opened himself. Aster hears the order to come up quickly, but explains that he destroyed the chains during the fight. Looking up with an innocent face, the heir asks if someone could do him the favor of throwing a rope down for him to get out of there. Shortly after, already back in the corridors and leaning against the window, the counselor asks if the boy is really sure about refusing the elite's invitation. Before the patriarch, the MC confirms the decision and warns that he has no interest in participating in the family's succession conflict. He reinforces that his place is in the secondary Viscounty, but the old man lets out a laugh, doubting this supposed humility. Staring closely at the boy, the leader states that it's impossible to hide the strong ambition reflecting in his gaze. Straight to the point, the elder deduces that the heir's ultimate intention is to turn his blade against the main clan in the future. Surprised, the boy gets startled when the ruler guesses and asks if Duke Roderick's head is his great target. Right after, the old man asks him to relax and guarantees that he doesn't intend to investigate the boy's real motivations right now. Aster is left without understanding this sudden tolerance and questions why potential rebels aren't treated as enemies immediately. Maintaining his relaxed posture, the leader replies that the family group is not united at all as people on the outside think. He comments that Roderick has gotten too stubborn, so he accepts using the boy as an obstacle to check the Duke's power. Turning his back to leave, the mage walks away, internally acknowledging that the ruler is a truly calculating monster. Outside the room, Maze asks how the conversation went and hears from Highfried that the integration invitation ended up being refused. The counselor shows total surprise at the unexpected answer regarding the boy's rejection of the main offer. With his hands on his hips, he just sighs and comments that this decision is a real shame for the boy's future. The noble ensures that the young man's life would be better inside the elite, but is interrupted when Aster calls him by the title of Count. Straight to the point, the boy asks the reason for receiving Maze's help in the arena, but the ally pretends not to know anything. Facing the MC, the noble smilingly confesses that he just felt like provoking a cheeky brat. Changing the subject, the counselor puts his arm around the heir's shoulders to congratulate him on his newly acquired title. With a conspiratorial tone, he asks the young man to pay close attention to the people present in the hall on their way out. In the corners, several big shots whisper with hostility about the need to recruit or eliminate the mage quickly. Resuming the walk, Maze explains that carrying the legendary magic mark attracts an absurd number of dangerous opportunists. Understanding the tactical warning, the boy asks if the man next to him is also just another one of these exploitative opportunists. Without losing his elegant posture, the Count listens to the direct suspicion without showing any negative reaction. He then reveals his leadership position at the Knight Academy and admits that securing promising youths is part of his job. Pointing discreetly, the recruiter shows that Viscount Highfried himself is also taking advantage of the moment to make alliances. Saying goodbye in a friendly manner, Maze warns that he hopes to see the boy enrolled in his institution soon. Watching the counselor leave, the heir concludes that it's too early to consider him a fully reliable ally. At that moment, his adoptive father touches his shoulder gently and suggests they finally start the trip back home. Overflowing with pride, the Viscounty leader says he can't wait to tell the details of that victory to his daughters. The boy agrees, laughing, already imagining his mother's despair when she sees the sorry state of his clothes torn by the fight. Somewhere else in the castle, a knight kneels as he is summoned to give an account of Darius's demise in the trial. Sitting on the throne, Duke Roderick ignores his own son's tragic fate and only asks about the adopted boy's situation. The subordinate is outraged by the paternal coldness, but swallows hard and reports that he has a complete breakdown on the matter. Intertwining his fingers, the Duke concludes on his own that the supreme power of the Seven Wings really awakened in the reincarnated enemy. The armored lackey goes into shock, realizing that the master already suspected that impressive magic anomaly. In his mind, the leader already imagines the boy as an absurd force, capable of destabilizing the entire balance of power in Elmheim. Fearing a deadly revolt in the future, the knight asks if it wouldn't be better to take some drastic measure to eliminate him immediately. Showing no concern, the tyrant firmly orders that no one lay a finger on the enemy heir. He argues that if the clan were to fall apart because of a mere childish obstacle, it would have ceased to exist a long time ago. Displaying a dark confidence, the ruler decrees that all the uncontrollable power will be his sooner or later. Until the right moment comes, he prefers to amuse himself by watching the baby he let slip away fight for its own survival. With that, The memory of the fierce takedown in the snowy forest resurfaces as a macabre trophy kept in the Duke's past. Casting a look loaded with malice, Roderick murmurs the victim's original name, recognizing that Ash has definitely returned. 4 years pass, and a crowd of young people now gathers in front of the admission exam for the Dream Knight Academy. At the busy reception, the supervisors guide the candidates to move forward quickly as soon as they finish the registration paperwork. Walking calmly through the courtyard, the MC draws attention with his older appearance, and the other freshmen begin to whisper gossip. The guys around doubt his identity, commenting that the famous prodigy of the family should be much more muscular than that. Upon reaching the registration desk, the signed document makes it clear that the institution is not responsible for fatal accidents in the practical exam. Without wasting time, the clerk crosses his arms and demands that the candidate present his magic mark right then and there for validation. Checking the registration clipboard, the examiner's eyes widen as he recognizes the illustrious surname of the military family printed there. The man swallows hard upon realizing he is evaluating the young man who has become the target of the continent's biggest rumors over those years. With an ironic smile, Aster warns that his emblem is located in a part of the body that's quite complicated to expose in public. Flaunting confidence, the young man runs his hand through his hair and jokingly asks if his own face isn't enough for approval. Already cleared through the screening, he walks toward the gigantic iron gate of the arena, which stands out on the horizon surrounded by anxious warriors. Halfway there, a freshman candidate raises his voice and orders the heir to stop walking immediately. The mage turns his neck calmly and listens to the guy pointing his finger, accusing him of having an expression that's way too cocky for a rookie. The aggressor makes fun of the boy's origin, insinuating that a skinny hick of that level got in the completely wrong line. Pointing to the crest on the wall, the brute tries to give a moral lesson, stating that only the absolute elite of combatants enter there. Unfazed by the cheap provocation, the heir agrees neutrally and simply turns his back on the threat. Indignant at the total disregard, the big guy tries to block his path, yelling about how tough the group's training will be. Smites points to the boy's waist and mocks the short weapon he carries, angrily calling him a fake swordsman. Wanting to pick a fight at any cost, the aggressor tells the newcomer to turn around and go home if he just wants to take a stroll. Watching the commotion from afar, other candidates lament that the guy keeps picking on the freshman for no reason. The colleague agrees but points out that the brute's real mistake was trying to intimidate exactly the sinister boy from the Elmheim family. Before the fight escalates, a familiar voice from the back interrupts the mess, calling the target by the title of the Seven Wings. A well-dressed young man approaches the commotion, theatrically celebrating the unexpected reunion with his dear blood relative. Instantly recognizing that annoying tone of voice, the MC casts a look loaded with fatal boredom and deep repulsion. Making an exaggerated bow, the red-haired noble introduces himself as Grion and acts completely fake by saying he missed his cousin. With a cynical smile, he justifies the use of the word relative only because the boy's birth origins remain unknown. Without taking the bait of this offense, Aster just dryly and ironically laments the fierce end that Darius met in the past. Far from feeling sad for the cousin, the enemy declares that it was a true relief to see the failure lose his life in the shadows. Grian confesses with total coldness that putting up with the fallen ally's arrogance was already becoming an unbearable annoyance for him. Closing the distance between the two, the lackey mockingly states that he doesn't believe a single word of the rumor about the rival's divine power. Drastically changing his expression, he whispers a lethal threat, reminding him that the heir won't have his adoptive father's protection inside the arena. Away from that deadly tension, the other competitors predict an imminent disaster, seeing two big shots from the clan facing off in the same exam. Observing the tension at the test site, the candidates comment on the visible hatred between the main family and its branches, preferring to keep their distance from this mess. In the midst of this atmosphere, an armed young man approaches hesitantly and asks if the boy dressed in black is part of the feared Elmheim lineage. Showing no emotion, the heir of the Seven Wings just stares at the newcomer coldly. Before he answers, Grian butts into the conversation, displaying an expression full of fakeness and cynicism. Keeping his cool, the MC ignores the rival's provocation and tells the rookie in a friendly manner that he can just call him Aster. General attention turns to the wide courtyard of the first exam, where the instructor's voice echoes, welcoming and thanking the participants for their courage. Firmly, the officer shouts that the warriors of that academy must serve and protect the king with their own lives. He warns that the candidates will be forged like glorious swords because the kingdom doesn't need dull and foolish blades on the battlefield. As the crowd walks toward an immense tower, they hear the final order. They must treat that test like a real war and prove their worth. In the middle of the group, Aster finds this whole speech ridiculous, but is relieved to acknowledge that he finally managed to return to that place. He reflects that becoming a knight of the kingdom was never an option in his past life, when he still didn't possess magic. Now, with his new powers, he knows that beyond this initial challenge awaits the man at the very top, Supreme Commander Rodri. Focused on his lethal objective, the boy mentally warns the villain to wait, as he will soon reach the clan leader. However, he is aware that to reach the patriarch, the mandatory first step is to survive this rigorous selection exam. With everyone gathered at the base of the arena, the instructor declares the immediate start of the test, giving no room for preparation. Suddenly, a volley of deadly arrows is fired from the walls, piercing straight into one of the participants' heads. The boy's body falls lifeless in a fraction of a second, marking in a brutal way the true beginning of the tower test. The examiner then announces, coldly, that only those who remain standing until the end of the onslaught will be approved. In despair, the rookies begin to be taken down by the projectiles, screaming without knowing how to defend themselves against such a dense attack. Confusion takes over the place. Some run stumbling and warn that everyone will perish if they stand still in the crossfire. Trying to survive, a group of warriors forms a defensive circle and starts deflecting the arrows with great physical effort. Observing from above, the instructor notes that the veterans, already knowing the dynamics of the previous exam, knew how to organize themselves as a team. Despite this cooperative tactic, the evaluator knows that the survival rate of this first stage never goes past 30%. He concludes that such basic defenses will soon fail in the face of the absurd and continuous volume of the traps. In fact, the goal of the test is to evaluate instinctive response under pressure, something Grion demonstrates by deflecting the attacks with extreme precision. The Academy seeks exactly this overwhelming resolution power, which only the prodigies carrying magic crests manage to achieve. While struggling to protect himself from the relentless attack, the brute Smites looks back and sees Aster standing still, thinking the boy froze in terror. At the same time, the red-haired noble Grion lets out a malicious remark, wishing his hated cousin becomes an easy target and gets peppered in the arena. Completely ignoring the offenses, Aster finally grips the metallic handle of his relic calmly. In an explosive movement, he projects a gigantic scarlet energy blade and spins his body, generating a massive displacement of air. Smites and the other candidates completely freeze seeing this absurd display of power. Immersed in a whirlwind of pure destructive aura, Aster shows a threatening posture, challenging the tower to throw everything it has at him. The gale generated by his magic is so intense that it creates an impenetrable barrier, knocking all the projectiles far away. Huddled on the ground to avoid their end, the survivors stare at the red tornado in panic, wondering what kind of monster that boy is. Completely sweaty and scared, Smites realizes that no arrow can even scratch the isolated target in the center of the field. Up there, the evaluator is baffled by the unmatched level of magic manipulation used to create that perfect defensive air current. Fascinated, the instructor murmurs that the rookie seems to be literally enveloped by a relentless storm of mana. Shortly after, the shots finally cease. The warriors slowly begin to stand up, trying to understand if the nightmare is over. Analyzing the devastated courtyard, the officer notes that the number of survivors was higher than expected thanks to the collateral protection generated by Aster. With an upbeat tone that ignores the carnage, he congratulates the living on their endurance and tells them to observe the scattered bodies. Next, he officially declares that all those who are still breathing on their feet have passed the first elimination phase of the academy. Without giving a minute of rest, the leader orders the survivors to follow him immediately to the area of the next challenge. While walking through the internal corridors of the castle, one of the participants mutters under his breath about the evaluator's ruthless rush. Walking beside Aster, a friendly colleague comments on the extreme exhaustion caused by the rain of arrows and asks if he is already feeling the fatigue. Intrigued by the MC's intact posture, the guy asks how he manages to walk so calmly after spending so much energy. From afar, the academy evaluator also keeps watching the steps and breathing of this impressive candidate. He notes, fascinated, that the owner of the 7 wings released a brutal amount of mana without showing any sign of exhaustion. In another part of the group, Grion advances with an air of superiority, followed closely by his subordinates from lesser houses. The red-haired noble's mind travels to a recent memory where an elderly counselor calls in a major favor in a warning tone. The order from the shadows was clear: prevent Aster's approval at any cost, so as not to ruin the future laid out by Rodri. Upon reaching the new area, the instructor forces everyone to swap their weapons for standard blades, claiming to ensure combat balance. The friendly guy who comes from a barony complains about this bureaucratic rule while receiving the new equipment from the staff. Analyzing the borrowed sword, he comments that it doesn't make much difference to him, as these iron weapons are common in the army. However, turning to Aster, he deduces that this sudden change was a maneuver to render the boy's powerful relic useless. Holding only the unlit metallic handle of the new weapon, the mage maintains his calm look, neither confirming nor denying the theory. Interrupting the conversation, Grion approaches with mocking claps and ironically praises his cousin for already recruiting new lackeys in line. The colleague reacts indignantly to the offense, but Smite steps in front of Grion to intimidate him, recognizing the inferior origin of the young baron. The brute makes a direct threat, warning that a hick noble will bitterly regret it if he follows the wrong master in there. Sweating cold with fear, the young baron steps back and stammers desperately, stating he has absolutely no interest in allying with the rookie in black. Hearing this pathetic betrayal, Aster notes the cowardice of the people around him and feels the atmosphere of the place become unbearable. Without lowering himself to a useless argument, the MC simply turns his face away, disgusted by so much fakeness. At that moment, the evaluator cuts the tense atmosphere and calls everyone's attention to explain the second test, a military simulation divided into 3 teams. The goal of the clash will be to dispute control of marked bases in the middle of the uneven terrain of a dense forest. He explains that controlling a base is achieved by raising the flag on the mast, and it is strictly forbidden to steal or destroy the opposing poles. Other than this single rule, the examiner guarantees there are no restrictions, encouraging them to eliminate without mercy any obstacle in their path. Holding colored armbands, the leader announces that he will immediately draw the members of each faction in the tournament. Tying red bands on their arms, Grion and his allies group up, displaying extremely confident postures with the result. On the other side of the arena, Bait places Aster on the blue team, ending up with the very same fearful guy from the barony who had rejected him. As soon as the signal smoke rises to the sky, the instructor declares that the carnage of the second stage has officially begun. Adjusting his gloves, Aster does some quick math. They will need to control at least 2 of the 3 territories to secure the group's victory. The cowardly colleague also realizes this ruthless logic and panics upon noting that only one of the 3 teams will make it out of the forest approved. Terrified, the young man laments that, inevitably, they will have to cross swords with the red faction of the influential Grion. Aster just raises an eyebrow, confused and not understanding the reason for so much fuss over an arrogant guy from the main house. Trembling, the rookie tries to explain that the real problem with facing high-ranking nobles is not their brute force. He confesses that the greatest terror of common candidates is suffering relentless retaliation from the clan should they defeat or humiliate them in the arena. The guy continues venting, stating that pointing a sword at the young master means ruining one's own career before it even begins. He recalls the terror imposed by the Elmheim lineage, warning that, in the worst-case scenario, the offender's entire family ends up being brutally wiped out. Hopeless, he asks if Aster wouldn't prefer to give up, justifying that running away now is better than throwing their lives away. Lowering his gaze, the young man murmurs that an absurd prodigy like Aster would probably never understand the dread that the weaker ones feel. Minutes later, the consequence of this fear materializes. Aster runs alone through the forest, finding it ironic to be isolated in a team test. He understands the situation, remembering that the Elmheim family is seen by everyone as a bunch of cruel tyrants, and Grion reinforces this fame. The memory of the boy admitting his own weakness and terror echoes in the heir's mind as he advances through the rugged terrain. He even finds the situation funny, deducing that, to the other participants, he is just another monster from that family who must be avoided. Upon reaching the ruins of one of the bases, the mage notices the environment is too quiet and finds it very strange that no one is fighting. He hides behind a wall, trying to figure out if the opposing teams are being cautious or setting up an ambush. Suddenly, a voice from above breaks the silence, mocking Aster's audacity for showing up there completely alone. Appearing in the courtyard, a blonde guy stares at the MC and comments that everything is going exactly as he had predicted. Confused by this statement, Aster repeats the phrase mentally, trying to find out what prediction the enemy is talking about. The opponent finishes tying the armband on his arm and confesses, arrogantly, that he was already getting bored from waiting so long. Next, he throws a piece of yellow fabric on the ground and calls the mage to fight, wanting to test his skills. Seeing the discarded yellow fabric on the ground, the MC instantly realizes there is something very wrong in this territorial dispute. He firmly questions the meaning of that attitude, recalling that the rules divided everyone into clearly defined rival groups. Meanwhile, far from there, members of the other teams walk together, revealing that they put their enmities aside for a single purpose. Beating this mixed march, Grion shows a confident posture and states that he will teach his cousin how the true main house fights to win. The original rules demanded territorial dominance, but the reality on the field had quickly turned into a huge plot armed against Aster. Knowing he needs to capture the bases to pass, Aster injects his mana into the new hilt and summons the massive Scarlet Energy Blade. He charges with everything, remembering that hoisting the flag is the absolute condition of the test, and therefore demands immediate explanations from the adversary. Without stopping his advance, the heir questions why the blonde isn't defending the yellow faction, which he belonged to. Bothered by the cheating, Aster demands to know why the rookie is wearing the red band, the color of Grind Squad. Drawing his own aura-illuminated sword, Christopher Nolan calmly answers that he struck an alliance with the nobles. Nolan is the prodigy heir of his family and bearer of 5 wings, widely recognized for his refined skill in swordsmanship. Watching the duel from the top of the wall, Director Mays recalls that Nolan was one of the only ones to pass the arrow test completely unscathed. The brutal clash between the two blades creates a massive shockwave in the courtyard, proving the absurd level of these two elite competitors. Impressed, the evaluator acknowledges that both are rare, rough gems, exactly the kind of talent the Academy seeks to recruit. Keeping the pressure on the attack, Aster repeats the word alliance in a mocking tone, finding that tactic to be a very bad joke. Pressing his blade against his rival, he questions this logic, remembering that in the end, only one color will leave the arena with the victory. Nolan naturally confirms the rule and shocks the MC by revealing that he decided to give up his own spot to guarantee the victory of Grion's team. Imagining the other bases being handed over without resistance, Aster puts the pieces together and concludes that his cousin used the main family's terror to force a general surrender. Remembering his teammates' warning, he understands that Grion used heavy blackmail to submit the participants from all factions. Resuming his offensive stance, Nolan justifies his submission by saying that no one in their right mind would throw themselves in front of a speeding carriage. He advances with firm steps, emphasizing that the knight's world is shaped by an extremely rigid and unforgiving power hierarchy. Landing a violent downward strike, the blonde yells that kneeling to the strongest is the natural and expected behavior among the nobility. Taking the full impact to defend himself, Aster narrows his eyes. He feels his metallic grip lock up in a very suspicious way. Immediately, he remembers the mandatory equipment exchange, realizing that the inspectors handed him an intentionally defective piece. Ignoring the obvious flaw in his rival's weapon, Nolan confesses that he also can't stand the Elmheims, but promises to keep the fight fair in a one-on-one. Increasing the force on his sword, the blonde reveals his true annoyance. He despises show-off rookies who try to steal the spotlight in the exams. The prolonged friction between the two weapons reaches its critical limit, generating intense sparks and pushing the physical resistance of the MC's weapon to the extreme. Unable to withstand the pressure combined with the intentional defect, the metal of the hilt finally cracks, and Aster's scarlet blade simply dissipates into the air. Without the magical barrier to cushion the heavy blow, the boy is thrown backward with force, dragging his feet in the dirt to avoid falling. Nolan lowers his weapon for 1 second, totally confused to see his opponent's equipment fail out of nowhere in the middle of the clash. Recovering from the shock, the adversary sees Aster pulling away and yells indignantly, asking if the heir is going to run away in the middle of the fight. Without even looking back, Aster just runs at high speed, warning that he will deal with Nolan later, as he knows exactly who he needs to settle the score with. Alone in the courtyard, Nolan puts his weapon away and mutters that such an escape is a disgrace to knights, thinking he struck fear into his rival. However, looking down, he notices the metallic pieces fallen on the ground exactly where the clash between the blades occurred. Analyzing the destroyed hilt, the noble notices the mediocre quality of the material, realizing that it wasn't his technique that won the dispute. Understanding the whole cowardly conspiracy set up to boycott Aster, Nolan throws the piece away, feeling disgusted by the Academy's dirty politics. Meanwhile, Aster runs straight to the blue base, coming across a scene of total invasion and surrender where his flag should have been hoisted. In the center of the base and surrounded by henchmen, Grian dismissively comments that his cousin arrived earlier than expected, a sign that the blonde's ambush failed. Sitting casually on a low stone wall, the villain mocks the situation, laughing at Nolan's promise to hold Aster back all by himself. Oozing superiority, Grian points to the sides and brags that his group just captured all 3 vases, dominating the test. Ignoring the point count and the scenery, Aster focuses on the lackey with deep hatred and pronounces the enemy's name with pure coldness. Squeezing what's left of the sabotage weapon in his hands, he demands to know what that coward did to his teammates. The red-haired noble stares at him for one moment, taking his cousin's fearsome fury without showing any regret for that dirty play. Pretending to think about it, he answers the provocation with a slow drawl of pure falsehood and irony. Pointing to the massive amount of deserters behind him, Grian cynically asks Aster not to take the total defeat personally. Among them is the young baron from the blue team, immobilized by henchmen and crying, justifying that he couldn't go against the main house. Mocking the pathetic scene, Grian proudly reports that the entire base meekly bowed their heads without offering any resistance at all. The lackey makes fun of the situation, saying that even those useless country bumpkins had the common sense to side with the strongest and most influential faction. Raising his fingers in an instructional manner, he decrees that the outcome is already decided and the Red Squad's victory is inevitable. Looking at the red flags, the noble recalls the exam rule: they just need to keep control of 2 bases until time runs out. He gloats over his rival's disadvantage, guaranteeing that, alone, Aster will never be able to regain control of the territory. Pointing to the blue flag thrown on the ground, the coward highlights that Aster has no team to stand guard at the bases he tries to take. Explaining the logic of his plan, he warns that Aster only needs to conquer and leave 1 base for the Red Army to take it back from behind. With an ironic gesture, he declares that this game of cat and mouse will end with the victory of the squad sponsored by Rodri. Hearing everything with a face full of anger, the MC takes 1 step forward, promising to destroy all this predictable strategy. With his eyes emitting a dangerous glow, Aster reveals his simple and ruthless solution. He just needs to slice everyone present into pieces. Hearing this sentence, the deserters step back in fear, feeling the atmosphere weigh down drastically in the face of the prodigy's wrath. Trying to mask his own discomfort, Grian accuses his cousin of trying a desperate bluff to intimidate their numerical advantage. Gaining courage, he points to the broken weapon in the boy's hand, reminding him that without it, the famous 7 wings are useless. Trusting his battalion as a shield, the lackey opens his arms and challenges the unarmed heir to try and face dozens head-on. Grian smiles maliciously and comments that the lack of a functional sword is a big problem for Aster. Keeping the mocking tone, he pretends to be impressed with the boy's useless stubbornness in not surrendering. Far from being shaken by the provocations, the owner of the 7 wings calmly raises what's left of the metallic hilt high in the air. Thinking the gesture is a sign of surrender, the lackey praises his cousin's ability to accept defeat and disadvantage. With his eyes shining with pure arrogance, the villain internally celebrates the absolute victory he believes is guaranteed. At his feet, the useless shards of the sabotaged blade remain scattered in the courtyard's dust. However, the MC's gaze changes drastically, and his body begins to emanate an intimidating light of pure, magical energy. Holding firmly onto the scrap of the sword, the boy just stares at the army, letting his cousin talk to himself. Blinded by numerical superiority, the red-haired heir maintains his triumphant expression, unaware of the imminent danger. At that exact moment, the small cracked piece reacts violently to the immense amount of mana that Aster begins to inject. Ignoring any limits of the equipment, Aster projects a colossal blade of pure scarlet energy which lights up the entire field. Faced with this unreal explosion of power, Grian's smile vanishes. He widens his eyes and lets out a gasp of dread. Taking advantage of the general paralysis, the prodigy leaps high into the air, wielding the giant blade with extreme ease. Desperate, the redhead raises his own sword in a survival instinct, trying to create a last-minute defense. With a relentless movement, Aster brings down the heavy blade and fires a massive shockwave at the group. The devastating impact sweeps the deserters away like ragdolls, breaking the formation and leaving the leader paralyzed with panic. Landing lightly on top of the stone wall, Aster coldly evaluates the damage done by his fierce charge. Pointing the glowing weapon towards the ground, he warns that blind and arrogant trust is what led Grion to this quick defeat. Trembling before such an overwhelming force, the villain swallows hard and curses his cousin, calling him a monster. Giving no truce to the insults, the MC unleashes another devastating attack, tearing through the very wind towards the enemy. At the exact moment he releases the strike, Aster jumps from the wall, while the cowardly lackey turns his back and tries to flee. Running for his life, Grion despairs, not understanding how the boy can cross such large distances practically flying. Tracking the target from above, the prodigy coldly decrees that Grion's reaction and sprint are pathetic for a knight. Landing a quick and precise slash on the fugitive's back, Aster hits him squarely, drawing a muffled cry of pain and despair. While watching his rival fall, a nostalgic memory invades Aster's mind. The day he managed to float for the very first time, still a baby. Descending towards his fallen cousin, he reflects that, having lived an entire past life without magic, he can savor the omnipotence of this energy even more now. Landing firmly on the courtyard floor, Aster demands that the lackey look closely at the wall from which he jumped seconds ago. Fallen and humiliated, the red-haired noble cowers in the dirty earth and begs, whimpering for the beatdown to end. Ignoring the cowardly plea, the MC raises the giant sword, ready to deliver the final blow in the middle of the courtyard. Looking down at the villain with a smirk, Aster warns that it's too late for pleas of mercy now. The blade comes down and a colossal explosion of mana hits the ground, kicking up a thick cloud of debris all over the field. After the impact, a tense silence takes over the place. The smoke of the destruction begins to slowly settle under the sun. Nearby, the big guy Smites and the other recruits watch the scene from afar, completely jaw-dropped and trying to understand what happened. Sweating cold before the unreal destruction, one of the rookies is completely speechless in the face of that prodigy's fury. Tearing through the curtain of dust, the owner of the Seven Wings appears walking calmly, dragging Grion's defeated body across the ground. He displays a cold and intact expression, as if he hadn't just single-handedly obliterated an entire squad without even breaking a sweat. Holding firmly onto the crumpled collar of the uniform, Aster drags his cousin across the ground, showing not one single ounce of mercy. Approaching the paralyzed crowd of recruits, the mage lets go of the fabric and leaves the lackey lying in the dirt. Observing the miserable state of their leader, the red allies tremble and begin to murmur, not knowing whether to attack or flee. Crawling pathetically through the dirt, Grion spits and demands with a weak voice that his troops attack the rival. In pure despair, he tries to use the weight of his last name, yelling that this is an unquestionable order from the main family. Bothered by this humiliating yelling, Smites finally takes one step forward, clicking his tongue with immense frustration. Before the brute attacks, Aster looks at the troops and asks coldly if they are really that afraid of suffering political retaliation. Smites grips the handle of his own weapon and confesses that yes, because a low-ranking noble like him could easily be wiped out by any big shot. Lowering his gaze, he bitterly explains that the weak have no other choice but to be obedient, so as not to lose everything. Raising his indignant face, the big guy shouts that a rich heir born with powers could never understand the oppressive reality of the lesser ones. Receiving this heavy outburst, the owner of the Seven Wings remains in total silence, absorbing the genuine anger in the rookie's words. At that moment, a very distant memory crosses Aster's mind, making his rigid expression soften suddenly. Noticing one tiny, almost imperceptible smile on Aster's face, Smite stammers in confusion, asking what on earth he is laughing about. Aster doesn't answer out loud, as his mind traveled back in time. He remembered the exact words of his protective sister Kudo, who had taught him the same harsh lesson in the past. Taking a deep breath to regain focus, the MC warns that he could counter the accusation, but agrees that his current light is extremely blessed. Meanwhile, trying to recover from his severe injuries on the ground, the red-haired lackey listens to the exchange of words without understanding the bizarre turn the situation took. Ignoring his rival's confusion, the heir raises his head with unshakable determination and declares that the only target of his true fury is the current and rotten main house. Overflowing with fierce intent, he promises to crush all the arrogance of the military rulers if the system cannot be changed. This declaration of open rebellion hits the recruits hard, leaving the crowd previously bought off by bribery completely shocked and pale. Still lying in the humiliating dust, the villain widens his despair-stained eyes and stammers, unable to believe the reckless blasphemy he'd just heard. On the other hand, Smots quickly pieces the speech together, realizing the gravity of the words and the true weight of that serious promise. Confirming the general shock of those present, the golden-eyed boy states firmly that this aggressive speech is, indeed, one formal declaration of war. Then, he warns the frightened students that kissing up to the corrupted nobility will only bring cowardly betrayals and tragic endings for those who decide to bow their heads. Keeping his tone sharp and direct, the mage decrees that the only way to avoid this miserable fate is to take up arms and fight against the oppressors. To prove his point, he points his giant sword at the paralyzed crowd and affirms that the unreachable power on his back exists exactly for this revolutionary purpose. With this, the prodigy puts the mercenary army against the moral wall, demanding to know which side they will choose to follow from that decisive moment of the exam. Seeing the control of the situation slip through his bruised hands, the fallen cousin completely despairs and threatens to burn into his memory the faces of anyone who dares to betray him. Pressured by two completely different monsters, the members of the enemy faction exchange terrified glances, not knowing how to act under so much tension. Taking advantage of the group's hesitation, the lackey continues yelling from the ground, reminding everyone that the severe punishment for disobeying the Duke's rules was well known. Faced with the threat, the big guy Smite swallows hard. With sweat dripping down his tense face, he feels fear consume him as he weighs the dangerous choices of that day. However, in one impulse of sudden and reckless courage, he lets out a loud shout and drops his defensive posture in front of his frightened peers. Cursing his own cowardly luck, the recruit dashes across the dirt courtyard, running with all his limited strength. As he advances quickly and without hesitation toward the isolated MC, the rookie's aggressive attitude makes it look like he decided to maintain his loyalty to the villain and attack. Watching the violent charge, the pathetic cousin smiles in pure relief, firmly believing that his threats worked and that the unbeatable monster will be caught by surprise. However, without moving one single muscle to defend against the supposed threat, the heir of the Seven Wings just follows the young man's desperate advance with an attentive gaze. Passing right by the unshakable target like a blind lightning bolt, the big guy quickly moves his trembling hand to the red band attached to his own shoulder. With one rough pull fueled by adrenaline, he tears off the enemy armband completely, screaming at the top of his lungs that he is the firstborn of the small Smites family. Raising the torn fabric into the dusty air, the young man announces to the entire military academy that he chose to switch sides and officially support Aster against the oppressors. This brave betrayal in the middle of the courtyard leaves the recruits and the lackey himself speechless, marking the exact moment when Grian's perfect scheme crumbles forever. Terrified and frustrated under the shadow of the sword, the cowardly Grian can only react by calling Aster a country bumpkin in pure despair. Ignoring the useless insult, Smites turns to the other rookies and demands some action from that paralyzed crowd. The big guy calls on everyone to show what they are made of and bet everything on the power of the prodigy's 7 wings. Inspired by his bravery, his own teammates enthusiastically pull him in, agreeing to join the rebellion once and for all. Watching the scene calmly, the MC concludes with satisfaction that he has already secured at least one side and won't need to do everything alone. Even so, he soon realizes that this number of allies is still too small to manage to take down the imposing main family. While the heir evaluates the situation, the defeated lackey remains kneeling on the dusty ground, brooding over his own humiliation all by himself. In this moment of vulnerability, one young fencer calmly approaches and reaches out his hand to ask if Grian is okay. Reacting with blind fury, the lackey slaps the extended hand away and tells that useless trash not to touch him. Totally out of control, Grian screams in protest, disgusted by the idea of the secondary family scum taking power. The coward knows perfectly well that if he lets his cousin continue with the revolt, he'll never be able to face his superiors again. Haunted by dark memories of the past, he recalls one fallen body in the darkness and promises himself that he won't end up like his brother. Holding his own bruised hand tightly, the villain gathers the rest of his fractured determination to try and keep fighting. Staring at this depressing scene from above, Nolan, the fencer, coldly asks what is wrong with that broken leader. Then, the rookie changes his tone and mocks him, pointing out that his old acquaintance is looking quite miserable. Upon recognizing his supposed ally, Brian shouts Nolan's name with a mixture of sudden relief and contained anger. He aggressively confronts his colleague for disappearing in the middle of the battle, reminding him that Nolan was responsible for dealing with the prodigy. In his corrupted mind, the villain cracks a sick smile, privately celebrating the fact that he still has one strong trump card on his side. Oblivious to this desperate celebration, Nolan evaluates Aster in silence, immediately recognizing that the boy's sword skill surpasses everyone's there. Out of patience for analyses, Grian rants from the ground and orders his ally to charge right away to cut the enemy to pieces. In response to the arrogant order, one piece of red fabric is abruptly tossed through the air. It's Nolan throwing his own identification armband on the ground, dryly stating that he only came to return that. The fencer makes it clear that the defeated leader's dirty and cowardly methods go completely against his sense of chivalry. Point blank, Nolan decrees the end of their alliance, leaving the lackey completely stunned and abandoned in the dirt. Watching all this confusion from afar, the official examiner panics upon seeing yet another family switching sides and breaking the exam's order. Turning his back on the fallen trash, the fencer draws his polished weapon and warns Aster that, from now on, they are back to square one. In turn, the owner of the Seven Wings just stares at his new opponent, waiting for the next move without showing any concern. Gripping the blade firmly, the young challenger praises the great pride and tradition of his family's fencing techniques. Driven by this pride, he proposes one direct clash to test this traditional strength against the absurd power of the heir's wings. With the duel declaration made, Nolan releases an intense golden aura that illuminates his entire sword in the courtyard. Wasting no time, the young fencer charges forward with everything he has, determined to prove once and for all which technique is truly superior. However, Aster blocks the lightning-fast attack with extreme ease and calmly warns that this fight will have to wait. To guarantee the necessary distance, he executes one quick movement with his scarlet blade, repelling the enemy's charge in a violent clash of magical energy. Feeling the crushing weight of the direct impact, Nolan widens his eyes, genuinely surprised by his opponent's brute strength. The fencer slides through the dirt to regain his balance and realizes, in practice, that the prodigy is on a completely different level. Even though impressed, Grian's former ally asks if the heir simply forgot the basic rules of the exam. Launching into a new quick attack, he reinforces that the rules state that only one team can pass the test to become a knight. Sword in hand, the youth tries to force the continuation of the clash, guaranteeing that they have no other choice but to decide everything right there. Once again, Aster dodges the blade effortlessly and murmurs that resolving things through elimination would be a big problem. Facing his rival head-on, the owner of the Seven Wings reveals his true intention and states clearly that he wants to see Nolan pass along with him. This friendly and totally unexpected declaration in the middle of the test interrupts the fencer's action, who steps back without understanding anything. To justify himself, the heir argues that after firing everyone up with one fervent speech of rebellion, it would be cowardly to ask them to give up now. Displaying a confident smile on his face, the mage guarantees that he has already come up with one perfect strategy to pass all the recruits present. The colossal audacity of the proposal leaves the fencer astonished, while the cowardly lackey listens to the conversation feeling a new terror take over him. Shocked by the idea that seems logically impossible, the big guy Smites exclaims that there isn't the slightest chance the boy can break the rules with impunity. Resting the weapon on his shoulder naturally, the prodigy admits he can't give absolute guarantees, but demands everyone's full cooperation to try. To take the first step in executing this absurd plan, he walks calmly toward his greatest enemy, fallen in the dirt. Totally battered and sweating cold with terror, the wounded lackey looks up at the monster who crushed his hopes for glory. Surprising everyone around, Aster extends his hand in a genuinely friendly manner and proposes that they make peace immediately. Before the alliance can be finalized, the loud strike of one staff on the ground breaks the peaceful mood, with the examiner demanding to know the meaning of that nonsense. Completely out of control with the test's interruption, the man yells indignantly, questioning if the rookies even know how to hoist a flag properly. Unintimidated by the authorities' fury, the heir calmly counters that the only written victory condition required merely the occupation of 2 or more areas of the field. Validating his argument, he confidently points to the nearby poles, where the 3 flags are now tied together, physically consolidating the team's alliance. Foaming at the mouth with anger over this loophole, the evaluator invades the boy's personal space, openly accusing him of making a complete joke out of the prestigious exam. Far from the argument, the other recruits watch the tense scene and sweat with nervousness, seriously doubting that this twisted logic will be accepted by the academy. Trying to use a real military scenario, the examiner aggressively asks if the boy would have the courage to shake the enemy's hand in the heat of an official war. Without blinking, Aster maintains his piercing coldness and answers with conviction that he would do it without hesitation, as long as the adversary had some value being alive. Faced with this calculating coldness, the man completely loses his patience and yells that a knight is merely the state's blind sword, having no right to judge anything. However, as a final blow in the debate, the MC coldly points out that they, in fact, didn't break any written rule for disqualification. Taken totally by surprise by this irrefutable and almost cynical argument, the examiner steps back a bit and is left completely speechless. Making great use of this gap of uncertainty, Aster leans even closer to the man and whispers one final threat, disguised as a simple piece of friendly advice. With a venomous tone, he questions whether the influential main military family would really stay quiet if the fake leader they sent failed due to a technical flaw in the evaluation. Suddenly backed into a corner by this heavy political blackmail, the official sweats cold and swallows hard, knowing he's trapped. With no way to decide the weight of the infraction on his own, the examiner is forced to consult his superiors, leaving the students waiting anxiously in the courtyard for long hours. As time passes, the tension in the courtyard grows palpably. Smythes' boot taps impatiently on the ground, deeply fearing the real consequences. The big guy soon panics, thinking the delay means they will all be expelled at once, but the MC simply answers with a calm indifference. Sitting comfortably on one supply crate, the heir argues that the long waiting time just proves that the High Committee is discussing the matter seriously. On the other side of the courtyard, the former leader of the ambush crosses his arms and turns his pouting face away, clearly feeling humiliated for having accepted that forced alliance. Curious about the evaluator's sudden change in attitude, one rookie approaches and asks the mage what he whispered to convince the rich kid to collaborate. With his eyes shining with pure mischief, the owner of the 7 wings cracks a cynical smile and answers calmly that he didn't use much of anything besides a few words. This casual conversation is abruptly interrupted when the military complex's heavy wooden doors are violently pushed open. Immediately, all the recruits turn their attention to the main entrance, feeling the mood grow significantly heavier with the arrival of the institution's authorities. Quickly resuming his authoritative posture, the newly cornered examiner positions himself in the center of the field and demands the complete attention of everyone present. In one loud, dramatic tone of voice, he informs the crowd that the official director of the academy intervened and took full responsibility for the exam's result. Staring down the young rebels with extreme seriousness and strictness, the man demands absolute silence in the courtyard so he can reveal the test's final verdict. Watching the slow approach of an older man in the entourage, Smuts wonders in confusion if that frail-looking gentleman is really the academy's great director. Reprimanding the rookie immediately, Gran tells him to have more respect for their superiors, even though, in fact, the director does look a lot like a regular old man. Breaking formalities, Count Maze approaches Aster directly and confesses with sincerity that the decision they had to make was extremely difficult. To explain the delay, he says that accepting so many candidates at once is something totally unprecedented in the entire rigorous founding history of that exam. However, he reveals that, with the unconditional support of the other directors, they decided to ignore standard protocol and grant the audacious claim of the prodigy with 7 wings. Without showing much emotion, the heir asks in a direct and objective way what this bureaucratic decision means in practice for the fate of everyone waiting there. Maintaining an incredibly calm expression in the face of the young man's boldness, the experienced director prepares to give the long-awaited, definitive answer. Without further ado, Count Mays officially decrees before the courtyard that all the candidates present have passed the exam and are accepted into the institution. The wonderful news hits the recruits head-on, causing the tense crowd to explode all at once into a deafening celebration for the unexpected victory. Amidst the enthusiastic shouts of joy, the director simply asks that everyone continue to work hard daily to prove that this decision was not a mistake. Still dizzy and unable to believe his own luck, Smots quickly turns to Aster and vigorously congratulates him on his official enrollment in the military academy. To formalize the end of the ordeal, the official examiner takes the floor again and formally welcomes the noisy new knights of the Drassel Kingdom Academy. Hours later, after the initial orientations, night gently falls over the large facilities of the military complex newly occupied by the lucky successful candidates. Relaxing deeply in the warm waters of the huge hot springs, Smites expansively celebrates that the food served is delicious and the baths are enormous. Submerged in the water, the big guy very humbly acknowledges that they are only getting the opportunity to enjoy all this luxury thanks to Aster's intelligence. While running his hand through his wet hair, the owner of the 7 wings simply listens in silence to the euphoria and genuine relief of his new allies. Smots is still so shocked that the boy managed to get everyone approved against the rules that he promises, right then and there, to faithfully follow him for the rest of his life. Hearing this exaggerated promise, Nolan crosses his arms and calls the rookies cheap opportunists for switching sides so quickly when the going got tough in the exam. Feeling personally offended by the direct provocation, Green counters from his corner that he didn't lose the fight against the heir, but merely agreed to a strategic tie. Ignoring the coward's lame excuse, the fencer emphasizes that the really important point is that they defied the main house and are now official candidates. Smites excitedly agrees with this optimistic view, firmly stating that these small victories will add up and create a giant wave to crush the Elmheims. Aster follows the group's growing excitement and declares with a deep look that it's exactly there, inside the enemy walls, that their rebellion truly begins. Thinking strategically about the next steps, he remembers that his 2 older sisters have already graduated, but the youngest, Alphen, is still studying at the institution. Calculating that classes start the very next day and that the girl has been there for 1 year, he deduces that she will surely help him adapt to the hostile environment. Finally stepping out of the hot water, the heir concludes that the most urgent step to take right now is, undoubtedly, getting used to the rigorous routine of that place. With that, his thoughts are interrupted when a strange noise and a muffled chatter coming from the other side of the hot springs catch his attention. He turns in confusion toward the sound and comes face to face with a completely bizarre scene happening right in the middle of the bathing area. A little startled by the sight, the mage steps back instinctively and asks out loud what on earth all those recruits are doing piled up like that. Without the slightest shame, the rookies are kneeling and fervently praying to him, justifying that the presence of a bearer of the 7 wings acts as a divine amulet. Seeing this absurd fanaticism from the crowd asking for heavenly favors, the boy can't contain himself, lets out a loud laugh, and tells them to knock it off. While the commotion happens, completely isolated in a corner of the bath, Grian hugs his own trembling knees, feeling the crushing weight of his recent choices. The coward looks gloomily out the academy window and secretly admits that he is already absolutely terrified of the punishments the future holds for him. Very far from that celebratory atmosphere, the darkness of the night covers the imposing mansion of the main family, where the internal mood is one of pure and suffocating tension. Staring at her lackey, kneeling on the floor rug, the fearsome Helen Elmheim physically demonstrates her profound disappointment with the pathetic result of the exam. With a voice dripping with venom, she throws in his face that instead of taking down the boy from the secondary family, he simply accepted the humiliation quietly, like a coward. Completely desperate before the matriarch's fury, the lackey begs his mother for forgiveness and tearfully promises to fix this very serious mistake at the first opportunity. However, before he can even finish the sentence, Grian's face is violently struck by a brutal kick that catches him totally by surprise. The aggressor, Helen, yells hysterically that there will be no kind of next time or second chance for a useless disposable trash like him. With the force of the impact, the boy is thrown backward without defense and rolls humiliatingly across the cold stone floor of the luxurious hallway. It is Lillian Elmheim who approaches next. She steps down hard and decrees with contempt that he is a complete failure, exactly like the late Darius. Already bruised and curled up defensively on the hard floor, the young man desperately begs for his own sister to have some mercy and stop the physical assaults. Completely ignoring the pathetic cries for help, the woman continues kicking the fallen body with a terrifying mix of cruelty and pent-up frustration. Each blow struck against him is heavily loaded with hatred for the successive failures that irreversibly stained the main family's perfect name. Receiving the physical punishment in a silence forced by the pain, the coward attributes all that pain and suffering exclusively to Aster's accursed existence. While taking the beating, the vivid memory of that crucial moment in the courtyard returns to Grian's mind, recalling when the prodigy offered his hand for a forced alliance. Still immersed in that agonizing memory, the lackey remembers asking his rival what exactly he meant by the imminent danger of returning empty-handed. In the memory, Aster stares at him with a dark look and tells him point-blank that the ruthless lord of the main family will certainly eliminate him if he finds out about his failure. The cold threat instantly freezes the coward's blood, as he clearly realizes that elimination would, indeed, be the only acceptable punishment in the Elmheim house. To make the psychological terror worse, the MC mentions Darius's final moments, describing the brutal scene of his passing as something genuinely disturbing to witness. Whispering like a snake near the wounded lackey's ear, the heir reminds him that no one in the world should lose their life in such a miserable and disposable way. Pressing his weakened mind even more, Aster pins the coward against the wall and directly asks if he wishes to suffer the same tragic fate as his past relative. Trembling with terror, Grian listens to the final proposal of staying completely quiet during the exam's confusion in exchange for guaranteed help to survive the family's wrath. Back in the painful reality of the present in the dark mansion, an imposing male voice echoes through the room, ordering Lillian to stop beating her brother immediately. Upon interrupting the attacks, the young man comments in a highly cynical tone that the family's cute little boy is already crying enough and apologizing for his mistakes. Comfortably relaxed on a spacious velvet sofa, Julius Elmheim opens his arms theatrically and decrees that everyone there is a family united by lineage. Losing a disturbing fake sympathy, the man reinforces that close relatives must always get along and maintain the house's unbreakable unity in front of others. However, as he speaks these words, he keeps his possessive hand cruelly gripping Althen's head, who remains completely motionless with a frightened face by his side. Standing in front of the large window that casts a sinister light on the hall, Lillian bitterly laments that their house's old image of absolute dominance has begun to waver. She doesn't hesitate to directly blame the existence of the Seven Wings' unreachable power for destroying the reputation of terror they built. Turning fiercely toward her brother resting on the sofa, the purple-haired woman decrees that the two of them need to act immediately to restore the natural order of things. With an insane and sadistic gleam dancing in her eyes, Lillian proudly states that they don't carry the prestigious name of the main family just for show. Julius fully agrees with this cruel view. He flashes a sadistic smile and says it is time to remind the rebellious rookies what true violence looks like. The next morning, oblivious to the approaching threat, the newly approved students gather in rigid military formation in the academy's giant courtyard for the opening speech. Positioned right at the front of the platoon, the military instructor in charge shouts that all those young people were hand-picked to serve the kingdom. He emphasizes with patriotic pride that the Royal Knights form a simply unbeatable elite troop, far surpassing any other armed force on the battlefield. And to maintain this high standard of excellence, the man rudely demands that all the aspiring knights present prove with their sweat and tears that they are also special warriors. The recruits pay close attention to the harsh words, definitely understanding that the much-celebrated passing of the exam was only the first step of the challenge. The relentless instructor continues his monologue, explaining that the academy system is strict and unforgiving towards anyone who can't keep up with the frantic pace. Making the rules clear, he reveals that the students are divided into 6 different ranking tiers and that the curriculum depends exclusively on this initial grade. The officer reinforces that the higher the capability demonstrated by the cadet in training, the more precious chances they will have to learn advanced and dangerous techniques from the academy. Mercilessly pointing out the most common limitations among the rookies, he decrees that whoever only knows how to swing a sword blindly is nothing more than a third-rate warrior. On the other hand, he explains that those who can already manipulate basic magic and fight physically at the same time are classified into the intermediate tier. To conclude the ranking explanation, the examiner declares that true excellence and the top of the hierarchy require the absolute and simultaneous mastery of both the blade and mana. To illustrate his warning, he exudes an extremely intimidating red aura and warns that the prestigious institution has no time to waste on common, talentless fools. The intense welcome speech ends with the brutal demand that the only freedom allowed to the students confined there is the freedom to constantly fight to become stronger. Wanting to test the rookies in practice, the instructor points to a very distant target pillar and asks disdainfully if they think they can reach that level right off the bat. Without wasting one single second, Aster already steps ahead of everyone with his heavy sword in hand, emanating an impressive force of magical energy from the blade. With an incredibly fast and fluid movement, the MC delivers a perfectly clean and precise strike against the surface of the reinforced iron pillar. The experienced examiner is visibly impressed by the boy's absurd ease in cutting the hard material, publicly acknowledging that he is undeniably special. Returning to his position and keeping his usual calm posture, the heir simply listens in silence to the many surprised comments of his peers in the background. Watching the test from an elevated pavilion, two officers comment on the recruit's absurd talent and wonder in amazement if he is really the famous bearer of the 7 wings. But the instructors also know very well that the true potential of a prodigy of that magnitude goes far beyond a simple cut on a magical stone. Discussing the boy's future, the men coldly conclude that if the boy is satisfied with just that, he will end up being easily devoured by larger predators. Sitting comfortably and following everything from his dark office, Count Maze silently agrees with this brutal and realistic assessment made by his subordinates. The director is fully aware that his entire immense institution is infested with dangerous nobles, ready to ruthlessly attack any sign of weakness in the rookies. Later that same day, the freshmen gather anxiously near the window bulletin boards to check their official rankings after the practical placement test. Holding his access card tightly, Nolan sighs wearily at the result and bitterly comments on how the academy is a machine obsessed with meritocracy. The skilled fencer laments that only he and Aster were thrown straight into the dreaded Tier 6, the lowest class among all those who passed this year. Despite the frustration of falling behind, he admits in a resigned tone that he already expected this and continues to stare at the humiliating rookie emblem in his hands. Finding his companion's complaint amusing, the heir tries to cheer him up by reminding him that, regardless of the grade, they need to reach at least the 2nd tier to become knights. Observing his friend's imperturbable tranquility in the face of such high goals, Nolan jokes by calling the boy boss and notes how he is extremely strict with himself. The MC is completely confused by the sudden nickname and asks, frowning, the reason for being treated with so much formality out of nowhere. Sweating a little cold at the mage's cluelessness, the fencer whispers a reminder that it was the heir himself who promised to crush the feared main family during the exam. He argues that many desperate recruits took that threat seriously, seeing in it the only real hope of being able to change the humiliating situation they live in. Proving his friend's theory, the big guy Smites and the rest of the commoners group really put all their few chips on the bearer of the 7 wings. Seeing them talking, Smites approaches with an excited smile and insists that the whole group is fully willing to carry their new leader to the top of the hierarchy. Putting his arm around the boy's shoulders, he shouts with contagious excitement that, working together, all of them will finally destroy the Elmheim Empire. Giving a half smile and accepting the weight of leadership, the prodigy agrees that the only real way out is to train hard and get much stronger to protect each other. Reinforcing the pact, he repeats the serious goal of taking down the oppressors once and for all, keeping an incredibly cold and determined expression on his face. However, breaking that tense revolutionary mood, the MC warns in a light tone that their most immediate priority is simply to fill their stomachs before training. Walking excitedly through the institution's wide stone corridors, he notices from afar a bizarre and noisy crowd completely blocking the passage. Trying to push through to understand the cause of the commotion, the two are approached by absolutely panicked recruits who tearfully warn them that the main family invaded the cafeteria. The student's desperate account indicates that one of the sadistic nobles is devouring the food aggressively while causing big trouble for the freshmen present there. Forcing his way through the frightened crowd, Aster finally makes it to the front and hears an arrogant voice loudly complaining about the delay in serving lunch. What he finds is a revolting scene. Julius Elmheim is sitting casually on top of defeated students' bodies, closely accompanied by his cruel sister Lillian. Staring at the brutality of the scene, Nolan asks in a shocked whisper if that incredibly sadistic man is really his new boss's brother. Unable to look away from the enemy, Aster confirms that the two are the infamous tyrant siblings from his family's main lineage. This dangerous duo's reputation is marked by extreme cruelty and the violent, disproportionate methods used against anyone who tries to cross their path. Feeling the weight of that real threat so close, the MC bitterly admits to himself that he had forgotten about the bothersome presence of those two in the academy. Noticing the newly arrived rookies, Lillian openly mocks that Aster has a pretty little face, very different from the disgusting trash agonizing under her boots. Right under the woman's filthy feet, a boy wearing a heavy, sinister iron mask groans in pain, unable to defend himself from the cowardly assaults. The noble Nolan is completely horrified by the senseless brutality and questions what the point is of using such a bizarre torture device. With an extremely dark and resentful expression, the heir patiently explains to his friend that this medieval object is an iron gag designed for severe punishments. The cruel item serves specifically to suffocate, torture, and correct weak relatives who made unforgivable mistakes and brought shame to the family's untouchable name. Giving a macabre laugh upon hearing the mage's explanation, Julius ironically praises the rebel boy's detailed knowledge about his house's darkest customs. To demonstrate in practice, he pulls Grion's hair with all the strength he has, feeling disgusted that the failure stained their immaculate name with a humiliating Tier 6 grade. Maintaining his oppressive posture, the tyrant maliciously states that the mere existence of someone so useless and talentless in the world is already a very pathetic story. Keeping up an insane and scary smile, the cruel man reveals that putting on the heavy mask was just a special gift to encourage the coward to try harder from now on. He argues, with sadistic logic, that depriving useless trash of food, water, and fresh air is the best possible reward to punish failure. Looking around, the rookies realize in terror that across the dark cafeteria, dozens of seniors are trembling with exhaustion, knowing they will suffocate if they stop trying to take the equipment off. Totally shocked by the hellish sight, Nolan realizes in a panic that absolutely all the seniors captured by the duo are wearing the exact same dangerous object on their faces. Completely relaxed in his position of absolute power, Julius tells all the freshmen to shut their mouths immediately and show respect for the suffering of the older students. Then, breaking her brother's order, Lillian walks slowly over to a young woman with light hair and drags her by force, forcing her to present herself in front of the newly arrived freshmen. The poor girl's slow, dragging, and painful footsteps echo through the massive cafeteria as she is rudely shoved into the center of attention in an absurdly humiliating way. Totally exhausted, the young woman stops with her back to the smiling tyrants and facing Aster, keeping her head down in complete silence. Upon recognizing her, the heir simply widens his intense golden eyes in pure and absolute shock, refusing to believe that the broken person in front of him is real. Making the most of the obvious despair plastered on the prodigy's face, the villain Julius openly mocks how his younger sister looks like a completely different and useless person now. Standing motionless and humiliated in the middle of the battered room, Sweet Elfin also wears the heavy family torture mask and shows a dangerous physical exhaustion in her legs. Seeing this absurd and painful situation, the big guy Smites shouts the girl's name with protective despair, while the MC clenches his fist until his knuckles turn white. Deeply ashamed by the cruel exposure before her brother and the new recruits, the young woman looks away to the floor, feeling the incalculable weight and pain of that public humiliation. Gradually, a silent and absolutely fierce fury takes over Aster, causing his dense magical aura to begin leaking uncontrollably from every inch of his body. In an incredibly explosive movement motivated by anger, he draws his giant sword straight from the scabbard, assuming a perfect stance ready for the imminent serious combat. Consumed by an uncontrollable, primal hatred, the rebel boy steps forward, yelling to demand what those sadistic monsters had the nerve to do to his sister. However, 1 second before he can hit his target, another heavy iron gag is thrown onto the floor and slides noisily until it hits his feet directly. Maintaining his carefree and incredibly arrogant posture sitting on the makeshift sofa, the tyrant Julius merely raises his hand and tells the young prodigy to stop right there and calm down immediately. The macabre piece of dark metal rolls mercilessly across the stone floor with a muffled sound, stopping threateningly right in front of the immobilized invading team led by the furious heir. The group of rookies stares at the scary torture object with extreme apprehension, stepping back slightly as Julius warns that he brought plenty of punishing equipment for all of them. Getting up very slowly from on top of the pile of fallen bodies he used as a seat, the sadistic villain opens his arms theatrically and invites the shaken recruits to join a fun welcome party.